Hello everyone, I'm Esra Akcan and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the panel Hagia Sophia Perspectives from Cultural Heritage. I will be very brief as we have quite a lineup of amazing speakers and we are extremely honored by the worldwide interest in our panel. Close to 4,000 people registered. I would like to thank all our panelists for accepting the invitation, the Cornell team for making this panel possible, and the audience for participating. This panel is motivated by the recent reconversion of Hagia Sophia in Istanbul from a museum into a mosque. During the broadcasting of the opening ceremony, the main focus was on architecture. The professional cameras and drones encircled the building from the outside in its prestigious location at the intersection of three waters and next to other architectural symbols such as the Topkapı Palace and the Sultanahmet Mosque. They panned the interior from the dome to the newly carpeted floor, from the apse to the minbar, and occasionally to the galleries. This is not surprising, given the splendor of the building's form, scale, structure, and craftswork on its surfaces. The art and architectural historians in this panel, and those who are listening, probably teach this building in their history courses as one of the handful examples in the entire world that illustrates spatial and visual distinction, technological progress, and intertwined histories of different cultures and religions. It is a must-have in art and architectural history surveys, a must-see for students, a must-preserve for cultural heritage enthusiasts around the world. This panel presents Hagia Sophia as a living monument, whose physical attributes have been produced, transformed, added, and subtracted over time, and whose reception in the imaginations of different populations have also changed over time, across 15 centuries actually. To represent this long historical process, we have invited scholars who will comment on the contemporary decision from the perspectives of their own scholarly work and study area. The speakers will present in rough chronological order of their historical field of expertise. Hagia Sophia, like all buildings, exists in a geopolitical context. And as a monument of its grandeur, it has perhaps been disproportionately affected by the ruling powers that control the lands on which it stood at any given point in time. As organizers, our intention is to discuss the building in a geopolitical context, but without reducing it to a card in presentist party politics and international negotiations. Even though we have a very long list of speakers whose bios you might find on our webpage, there are dozens of others whom we would have loved to host in this panel, including Gülürün Ecipoğlu, Robert Nelson, Veronica Callas, Nasser Rabart, Suna Güven, Said Öztürk, Tolga Uyar, Levent Gültekin, and many others. They could not join us today, but their ideas will no doubt appear in references. We will start immediately after Peter introduces the panel protocol. Peter?
Yes, thank you, Ezra, for that introduction. And thank you to both the session participants and our webinar attendees for joining us in this important discussion. I want to briefly introduce the protocol for the discussion today, protocol that we hope will allow us to maximize the efficiency of our program so as to allow all of our speakers sufficient time to share their reflections and for our attendees to participate in the discussion in a timely way. Each speaker has 8 minutes to speak and may share their screens and show accompanying images. Our captioner will not be spelling proper names. If you are interested in the spelling of any of these names, please contact us after the event. After our last speaker, we will have a maximum of 2 minutes per person to address additional points, comments, or questions related to the presentations of the other speakers. Upon conclusion of this round, Ezra and I will make a selection of questions submitted from attendees over the course of the session to put to the whole group. Attendees will be able to submit their questions by writing them in the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen. In order to avoid pop-up distractions for the speakers, please submit your questions only after the first round of presentations are completed. And please keep your questions short, so no more than 2 sentences. And please keep them succinct as well. We expect to select questions that address issues across presentations. We hope to wrap up the session at 2:30 Eastern Time or very shortly thereafter. With that, I would like to begin by introducing our first speaker, Namik Erkal, who is a member of the Department of Architecture, TED University, and specializes on the history of architecture and urbanism of Constantinople, Istanbul. Namik.
Thank you, Peter, for the introduction and having me on this webinar. I will talk on Hagia Sophia from the perspective of urban archaeology, diachrony, and public spaces. My focus will be the urban square at the southwest of Hagia Sophia, partially the present-day Hagia Sophia Meydan. I will concentrate on two temporal sections, Constantinople's first 200 years and Istanbul's last 2 decades. The imperial center of Constantinople officially dedicated a capital city in 330, was built on the hilltop sectors of ancient Byzantium, conforming to an existing gridiron plan. The core of this new center was a forum reconfigured from the upper agora, around which were a senate, imperial baths, a great palace, hippodrome, and a secular basilica. The main thoroughfare of the city terminated here. That would be constructed through the capital city's first century as a colonnaded street allotted by imperial fora and commemorative columns. The first Hagia Sophia, called the Great Church, was a basilical structure consecrated in Constantius II's reign on the northeast side of this forum. In the written sources dating after the early 5th century, the name of the forum began to appear as the Augustaium. It means the place of the Augusta, an official title given to acting royal imperial woman. According to tradition, the place was named after a porphyry column with a statue of Augusta Helena that was erected by her son Constantine I. There might be some missing links about this identification, as recent feminist history studies underline, the case of Augustaion, where an imperial forum is referred after a female royal, is unique. What is the significance of Helena? Helena's legacy had been popular 60 years after her death, and new details about her visit to Jerusalem had surfaced. Accordingly, the Empress had unearthed one of the most significant relics of Christianity, the True Cross. The commemoration of a pious empress related with a holiest of Christian relics at the forum adjacent to Hagia Sophia is remarkable. Constantinople's foundation as a capital city did not secure its status as a religious center, which didn't possess the apostolic histories of the major Roman metropolitan sees, Rome, Antioch, and Alexandria. It was only in 381 that the Council of Constantinople declared the city as a metropolitan see on the basis that it was the second Rome. The established patriarchy took its place in between the Constantiusian Great Church and Augustaion at close distance to the imperial palace. In the early 5th century, the imperial and religious institutions confronted here. The latest of a series of controversies between the Patriarch John Chrysostom and Aelia Eudoxia, Emperor Arcadius' wife, took place about a silver statue of the Empress on a porphyry column recently erected close to the Augustaion. Patriarch John objected the pagan nature of the dedication and condemned it. As he was removed from office and sent to exile, the clergy and citizens rioted, during which the Constantiusian church burned down. The base of the Eudoxia column was discovered in the mid-19th century during the construction of the university by Fossati brothers. Also, the restorers of Hagia Sophia Mosque. John Chrysostom is a highly respected saint whose post-iconoclasm mosaic embellishes the northern tympanum of Hagia Sophia. Eudoxia's son, constructed a new church that was dedicated in 1415. The atrium gate of this building was unearthed in 1930s during excavations at the Hagia Sophia Museum. A century after the Theodosian construction, during the Nicene revolts against the rule of Emperor Justinian, the whole environs of Augustaion, including the church, was devastated. After the revolts, Justinian reconstructed the whole area, sustaining the urban structure that was formed in Constantinople's first 100 years. The Justinianic Hagia Sophia was built within a tight fabric of enclosed open spaces and was not a freestanding building. However, its volume had grown from inside out to such a scale that, as Procopius remarked, it was visible as an artifact from the whole city, from the sea, from the hippodrome, and most closely from the Augustaion. As an architectural wonder, the visible body of the church would be the relic of Constantinople, which validified its existence, sacredness, and eternity. 7 years after the completion of new church, Justinian erected his imperial column in the Augustaion. Appropriating the parts of a former imperial statue, the column, as high as the church drum, held an equestrian bronze-plated statue of the emperor. Thinking where the former emperors placed their imperial columns, it can be said that Justinian planned to convert the Augustaion into his own forum. As the forum was restored with marble pavements, its public use was restricted and began functioning as a courtyard between the main church and the palace. The name, if not the space of Augustaion, survived until the end of Byzantium. In the last 2 decades, the environs of ancient Augustaion have emerged as a new cultural arena between opposite political poles of the metropolitan population. In the early Republic, not only was the Hagia Sophia Mosque converted to a museum, but also the old imperial center was designated an archaeological zone and a museum quarter. After the 1980s, the museum quarter was transformed into a touristic hub, and then with the vision of global city Istanbul, it became a space for international representations. Major receptions and cultural events like the celebrated Istanbul Biennial used here as their venues. Things have changed in the 2000s. By a series of infrastructural projects, the accessibility of the historical city increased significantly, which emerged as a metropolitan public space. The municipality of the time, having a conservative base, started to seek alternative local cultural representations in these public spaces by organizing free activities majorly related with the Ottoman imperial past, Islamic calendar, and traditional arts. Sultanahmet became a place where conservatism and localism confronted cosmopolitanism and globalism. Last year, the new secularist municipality held Republican Day celebrations in Hagia Sophia and Sultanahmet squares. Half a year later, museum function of Hagia Sophia is dismissed. In an age of cultural polarizations, the major threat for cultural heritage is populism and revanchism, which builds on monuments, museums, and relics. Globally, many examples can be given. It should be a real irony that this context forces us to talk about the preservation of monuments instead of the conservation of historical sites. Thank you very much.
I'll introduce our next speaker. Christina Maranchi is the Arthur H. Dadian and Arati Öztemel Professor of Armenian Art and the Architecture and Chair of the Department of the History of Art and Architecture at Tufts University. Christina.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go into slideshow. Okay, does this work? Am I visible? Okay, Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation to speak. I want to talk about something that may be lesser known for many people, which is the Armenian intervention at the Hagia Sophia. So I'm just going to start. We know that an Armenian named Turdat in the 10th century made some repairs to the Hagia Sophia. So this speaks to what Ezra mentioned before, which is the diverse history of the Hagia Sophia. And so that's why I want to focus on it today. So the specific textual mention of an Armenian working at the Hagia Sophia in the 10th century occurs in the universal history of Stepanos Taronetsi. And this is a early 11th century history. And the story of the architect Turdat, and I'm just gonna go forward. Okay, did I just advance? Yeah. Happens, it's in chapter 27 of the third book, and it's in a chapter that is about also the appearance of a star in the sky, and the death of one of the rebels who was working with Bardas Phokas against Basil II. So it's about this is taking place within the context of Armenian-Byzantine relations. Super long slide, I won't go through it all, but I want you to note that at the bottom, we have the mention of the destruction or the damage done to the Hagia Sophia. So you can see, and my screen is partially covered, but hopefully you can see where it says it even struck the very Church of Sofia itself, which is the cathedral, which was split from top to bottom, something like that. So after this is mentioned in the text, we hear about the architect Turdat and about his, I'm just putting this down here. Sorry, my faces are in the screen is in the way. But we hear about the many architects who tried to restore the church, but that it was actually successfully restored by the leading architect of the Armenians, Turdat the stoneworker, who happened to be in Constantinople. And then the text goes on to say what he did. He offered a plan of the building, and through clever invention, he prepared models of the apparatus and started the rebuilding. It was constructed beautifully, more brilliant than before. So that's where we get our sort of notion of this 10th century intervention into the Hagia Sophia. The archaeologists William Emerson and Robert L. Van Nuys did studies of the Hagia Sophia and determined what they felt like was Turdat's intervention in the building. And I won't go into too many details about this, but I just wanted to show you, this is the area they identify as being part of the 10th century repair. So this is the western arch and the western segment of the dome that you see here. Again, there's a lot of archaeology here. I won't go into the details, but they identify several features of this restoration that you can read about here, but we don't need to go into too many details. Basically, what he did was he increased the Turdat, according to Emerson and Van Nuys, increased the depth and width of the Great Western Arch. He added mass to the outside of the dome base. I'll show you this in a minute. And on the inside, he made a cornice that practically runs straight. Just to go back for a minute to the view, you can see, and this maybe you've noticed before at Hagia Sophia, there's this straight bit on the western side. So that is attributed to Turdat. Here you see what Emerson and Van Nuys identify as Turdat's work on the outside of the western arch. So it's this rise here that they're looking at. And they think that this actually was done in order to counteract forces that Turdat saw on the other side of the dome, so that he was observing what he thought was structural failure, according to Emerson and Van Nuys, and trying to counteract it in order to rebuild the church in a more solid way. So having just discussed what he did at the Hagia Sophia, you might well ask, well, why Turdat? What might have been the reasons for his involvement at Hagia Sophia? And luckily for us, this is a rare example of an architect, a medieval architect, who is not only mentioned in his historical chronicles, but also we have his buildings that survive in Armenia. So for example, you see here a church that is attributed to Turdat by textual mention. And it's a early 11th century church. And what's interesting about this is that this church was made as a copy of a 7th century church that had fallen down in an earthquake when Turdat went to make a copy of it. And this is all chronicled through the same source I mentioned before. Basically, we're told that Turdat was asked to make a copy of the church on the left, the Church of Zvartnots, which had at that time already fallen down and been in ruins. So what it seems like is that Turdat is observing in his homeland also structural failure and making changes in order to prevent those kinds of failures from happening in his new buildings. This is Zvartnots as it looks like now. And unfortunately, his new building also fell down. So I guess he didn't really do a great job with it. I'm not blaming Turdat. I just wanted to show you a few other examples of Turdat's work. Notice in the text, he's called the stoneworker, Turdat the stoneworker. And this is his great building, his kind of, great achievement according to the history of Armenian architecture, the Cathedral of Ani. And we can see here the stonework that is mentioned in the text. We can see how this looks, and that is we see very carefully cut, joined stones lined up in courses. Design is one of the key features of Turdat's architecture, and you can see here one of the dome piers of the Cathedral of Ani, and you can see how carefully this structure was thought out and designed, which may have been another reason why he was suited for the task of repairing the Hagia Sophia. We're going to go over that. And then I just wanted to show you a few other slides of the Cathedral of Ani to give you a sense of that church. And then a couple more things I want to say before I finish. What's interesting about the 10th century and Turdat's involvement with the Hagia Sophia is that also in the 10th century, a story emerges in Armenian history that the architect of Zvartnots, that 7th century church, was asked to go to Byzantium, to go to Constantinople by the emperor, in that case Constans, and build something for him. So we get this idea in the 10th century of importing Armenian architectural expertise in the person of Turdat on the one hand, but also in the instance of this unnamed architect of Zvartnots. Unfortunately, in that case, that mason never arrived because he died on the way. But still, it's this idea of kind of Armenian expertise being imported. I want to end by jumping into the modern moment and give you a little sense of how this story of Turdat and the Hagia Sophia is preserved in the modern Armenian imagination. And what I'm showing you here is something really interesting that I only found a couple of months ago, came across. And that is a play by the great Armenian architectural historian Toros Toromanyan. It's unfinished and it's not published. I mean, it's published, but it wasn't ever published at the time of his lifetime. He died in the 1930s. But it's essentially a theatricalized version of Basil II and Turdat and the repair of Hagia Sophia. And I just translated for you the last bits of it, where Basil II basically is asking Turdat to stay in Constantinople with him. And he says, he's saying, would you forego the glory and the honor and greatness in my powerful state to go to this small country, barely equal to one of my back provinces and insufficient to fertilize your creative talent? And artists such as you would honor my country. Stay here. And Turdat answers by saying, no king, my homeland, or Hayranik in Armenian, calls me. Answered Turdat with pride, Armenia is my homeland, I shall go to Armenia. So this story of Turdat has tremendous richness, importance for the Hagia Sophia, importance for Armenian architecture, and it remains alive today. Thank you. Okay, and now I would like to introduce Maria Georgiopoulou. who is the director of the Gennadiest Library of the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. And I'm going to stop sharing and go away.
Thank you, Christina. My comments will be somewhat different from the two previous presentations as I speak to you as a head of a library. So I will focus on Hagia Sophia as a symbol for the exchange of knowledge, understanding and dialogue between both scholars and visitors who seek to comprehend the connections and differences between cultures. The monument has stood as one of the most powerful symbols of two empires, the Byzantine and the Ottoman, and in the last 100 years it has become a point of contention between nationalist ideologies and political exigencies. I will speak from the point of view of research institutions that are international in scope. By definition, their mission is to attract scholars, to build bridges by forming alliances and brokering agreements in order to generate learning. As head of one of the two august libraries of the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, as an Athenian who spent 20 years outside my country of origin, and as a scholar who formed her scholarly opinion and outlook about Byzantium in California when I arrived there as a Fulbright exchange student many years ago, I'm a strong believer in international education and scholarly exchange. So the contact of scholars and intellectuals who travel to see monuments, explore hard to reach archives, speak to colleagues from other lands and different disciplines. In short, scholars who have an open mind is what sparks intellectual curiosity and generates true scholarship. I will therefore want to think of Hagia Sophia not only as a symbol, but also as a locus for educational diplomacy, because I think this is what we're up to. It will come as no surprise to anyone that for me as an art historian, my library, in quotation marks, is an image or a monument. These constitute invaluable primary sources. No matter how virtual reality or 3D imaging captures a monument or an image, there's nothing to replicate the impact, aesthetic and highly emotional, that you experience when you visit a magical space such as Hagia Sophia. The experience of the locale opens up new paths of understanding, not only for art and architectural historians, but also for philologists and historians. It would have been nice to have heard Bissera Pencheva about the experiential quality of this building, this phenomenon that truly enhances our interest, our scholarship, and our teaching. At the Gennadiest Library, we have run since 2005 a Byzantine medieval Greek language summer seminar, which mirrors the course offered at Dumbarton Oaks in Washington, DC. What is different in the Gennadiest program is that we take our students to Byzantine monuments in Greece, where they have to give reports on site. This is the model of the American school. Obviously, when you read the stories of the miracles of Holy Luke, Osios Lukas, inside the crypt of the monastery, where people came to spend the night next to the tomb of the saint, expecting for a healing miracle, the text becomes more palpable. It becomes alive. So by nature, this experiential quality, visceral, emotional, and aesthetic at the same time, grabs you and adds layers of understanding to your appreciation of the past. So contact with the real thing, especially when the real thing is something as magical as Hagia Sophia, is what makes everything powerful and important. The contact with the monument also needs to give the viewer a faithful record of its history. The restoration and presentation of the monument needs to provide access to the different phases, the different pasts of a complex, especially of a contested monument. Yet decisions related to protection, restoration, promotion of cultural heritage, not only in Istanbul and Turkey, but everywhere in the world, are more often than not entangled with political, partisan, and economic decisions. So during moments of political adversity, who acts as a watchdog for preserving the multiple identities and histories of a contested monument? The narrative, fundraising, decision-making depends on the affiliation and legitimacy of the custodian of the monument. So in order to allow, not to allow rather, for any layer of history to be wiped out, we need to insist that all restoration is reversible. And it is unfortunate, but the listing of monuments in the world's monument watch list of endangered sites or the intervention of UNESCO, unfortunately, cannot undo bad decisions that are due to political or religious decisions. I would point you to Robert Osterhout's sobering descriptions of the fate of the restoration of the Pantokrator Monastery, the Zeyrek Jami in Istanbul, a monument under the jurisdiction of the General Directorate of Pious Foundations, the same entity that is in charge of Hagia Sophia today. So what happens when these monuments are endangered, closed to scholars, and take on an afterlife that obscures their rich history? What can we do as scholars? This summer, the organizing committee of the conference of the International Congress of Byzantine Study that was to happen in Istanbul next year opted for a change of venue due, in quotes, to other concerns associated with issues of heritage management. Is there no hope? I believe that what we have to do is to provide the means to strengthen an international trend that has been quite important in the last 20 or 30 years. Namely, to keep Byzantine studies alive and well in Turkey, and Ottoman and Turkish studies alive and well in Turkey, in Greece, and in other parts of the Ottoman Empire, of what used to be the Ottoman Empire. Programs of an international scope, educational and cultural diplomacy, so to speak, provide our only way to counteract the catastrophic decisions of politicians. The flow of scholars between Greece and Turkey, the openness of young colleagues to cross linguistic and confessional barriers, the access to universities and research centers such as yours or in Europe and the US needs to be kindled. The big foundations, the Onassis, Niarchos, Koch, the Mellon Foundation have been instrumental either in establishing program and in supporting programs of Byzantine studies at Boğaziçi University and Koç universities. Joint fellowship programs between ARIT, the American Research Institute in Turkey, and the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, the Coulson Cross Aegean Fellows, for instance, and of course the Fulbright Foundation have offered possibilities for students to develop programs of research. Similarly, the Getty Foundation has interest in seminars about connecting art histories and thinking outside the box. All these exchanges have led to smaller or bigger informal think tanks that encourage dialogue. So in this moment of crisis, I believe it is even more important that we find ways to fight back by supporting scholarly research, nurturing the plurality of voices, and fostering dialogue between scholars who are willing to think differently. Let us join forces to institute an ever stronger educational diplomacy in order to save excavations, promote the digitization of archives open to all, educate scholars, and offer alternative modes of thinking and outlets for scholarly growth while striving for the well-being of the monuments. So that eventually this dreadful piece of news that we received this summer will be only a small, reversible parenthesis in the august story of Hagia Sophia. Thank you. It is now my task to introduce the next speaker, Sevil Engensoy Ekinci, who is an independent scholar and affiliated faculty member at Istanbul Bilgi University, working on the historiography and early modern architectural encounters across geographies. Sevil.
unmute myself. Okay. Thank you, Maria. And thank you, Esra and Peter, for inviting me to this exciting panel. It is nice to smell the air of Cornell, Sibley Hall, and Ithaca, even virtually. All right, let me share my screen. I hope it works. I hope it works. All right. On June 25th, 2020, a Renaissance painting known as the Portrait of Mehmet II with a young dignitary and attributed to the workshop of Gentile Bellini was purchased by Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality at an auction at Christie's in London. It was a surprising move and created a sensation in Turkey, not only through its winning bid of £770,000, but also through its underlying message that Mehmet II was a Renaissance ruler. We are already familiar with this message from an earlier exhibition of another portrait of Mehmet II, the famous one by Bellini himself. As a single-piece exhibition, the portrait was in Istanbul in 1999 on the occasion of the 700th anniversary of the foundation of the Ottoman state. This exhibition and the recent acquisition of a Mehmet II portrait are actually examples of an international academic and popular interest in shifting geographical boundaries of Renaissance art and architecture towards the Eastern Mediterranean. As some more examples of this interest that we have been witnessing for several decades, we see here at the top the posters or covers of catalogs of some exhibitions organized in Turkey or abroad. And at the bottom are the covers of a selection of books published in Turkish and English. Well, as a scholar working on the historiography of architectural encounters across the Mediterranean in the 15th and 16th centuries, let me add some more names to the picture. The first one is Francesco Filefo, a humanist and a well-known Greek specialist of 15th century Italy. While working as the secretary of the Venetian delegation, Filefo studied Greek in Constantinople in the 1420s with distinguished scholars. His close connections with the Byzantine intelligentsia in the city continued well after it became the Ottoman capital. This brings us to Georgios Amiroutses, a renowned Byzantine philosopher. He later became a member of Mehmet II's court, where he continued his studies, discussed philosophy with the Sultan, and for him prepared a world map based on Ptolemy, and also translated Ptolemy's geography into Arabic together with his son. Well, Filefo spent the major part of his career in Milan as a member of the Duke Francesco Sforza's court. It was there that he enjoyed a close friendship with Antonio Pietro Avellino, better known by the pseudonym Filarete, a Florentine sculptor, goldsmith, and architect. In addition to the bronze doors of St. Peter's and some architectural projects in Milan, Filarete is known today by an untitled book on architecture that he wrote in the early 1460s. Now, what connects these three names is a letter written by Filefo, dated July the 30th, 1465, and addressed to Amiroutses. In the letter, Filefo presents Filarete to Amiroutses by praising his professional abilities and mentions his plan to visit Istanbul by asking Amiroutses' help during his stay in the Ottoman capital. Today, we do not know whether Filarete could realize his plan or not, whether he could visit Istanbul or not. But still, what is so important about this letter is that it materializes the intricate networks among Renaissance, Byzantine, and Ottoman worlds in the 15th century. So although we do not know today whether Filarete could ever see Hagia Sophia, at least from outside or not, we know that he wrote about it very briefly but remarkably in his book on architecture, in a section about the decorative use of marble in buildings. Explaining in great admiration a type of marble having patterns similar to human and animal figures, he said, quote, "I have heard that in Santa Sofia in Constantinople, there are many more like it, with different forms of men and different animals," unquote. What I would suggest here is that Francesco Filefo might have provided Filarete with first-hand information about Constantinople, about its architecture and its buildings, and of course about Hagia Sophia as well, by recalling his experiences of the 1420s. He might also have introduced Filarete to a book titled Comparison of Old and New Rome, and written in the 1411 by Manuel Chrysoloras, a respected Byzantine scholar of Greek language and literature, and also a tutor of Italian humanists. As a master of ekphrasis, Chrysoloras drew verbally urban and architectural images of the cities of Rome and Constantinople in his book, and devoted a long passage to Hagia Sophia, starting with the question, quote, "Who, seeing that church, so well named after the wisdom of God, would be able to describe or admire or even remember anything else," unquote. Apart from this book, Filarete might also have heard of, if not seen, an early copy of the map of Cristoforo Buondelmonti, a Florentine traveler with some humanist background, and the drawings of Cyriacus of Ancona, a traveler again, and an antiquarian, while getting prepared to travel to the Ottoman capital. Beyond these assumptions, what connects this architectural book, this book of ekphrasis, this map, and these drawings is that they are all very exceptional documents, and most probably the only 15th century examples of their categories about Hagia Sophia. Furthermore, what these names and this textual and visual material, together with all the others that I have mentioned so far, point out are the interwoven relations among Renaissance, Byzantine, and Ottoman worlds in the 15th century, before or after the conversion of Hagia Sophia into a mosque. Obviously, such a context, characterized by the porosity of boundaries between these worlds and the mobility of people and objects across them, has nothing to do with the militarist and chauvinist rhetoric of conquer used to justify the recent conversion of Hagia Sophia into a mosque again. The complexity of this context, in other words, requires interdisciplinary and transnational studies that resist such a rhetoric. So despite the hegemony of this rhetoric of conquer, we will insist on viewing the portrait of Mehmet II and a young dignitary as a very recent example that reminds us of the intertwined histories of Renaissance, Byzantine, and Ottoman worlds, when it will go on public display in early October. Thank you very much. And now let me introduce Çiğdem Kafesçioğlu, who is professor at the Department of History at Boğaziçi University, Istanbul. She works on the urban, architectural, and visual culture of the early modern Ottoman world. The screen is yours, Çiğdem. I have disappeared, by the way. Anyway.
All right. Thank you, Sevil, and thanks to my colleagues at Cornell for organizing this event and for their kind invitation. Let me share my screen. And start in a moment. All right. So what I'd like to highlight in my limited time here is the rupture between what we know of the fabric of and attitudes towards the Hagia Sophia within the long term of Ottoman history and the present day representations based on an exclusivist, essentializing view of the Byzantine legacy and of this singular monument, for two reasons, basically. One, that this rupture has proven extremely difficult to make visible in present-day Turkey, and to some extent also beyond. And the second is also the same rupture, or the same gap, we can say, is intimately connected to the recent conversion of the building back into a mosque, and the way this has been presented within Turkey and beyond. Through the course of the 20th century, in the conservative anti-secularist reaction to a set of modernizing measures in Republican Turkey, which included, in fact, the conversion of the mosque into a museum, Hagia Sophia has been singled out as the ultimate symbol of an idealized Ottoman and Islamic past, a symbol of conquest, and of a past whose revival was sought. So the making of this, in fact, goes back into, in some respects, goes back into the 19th century constructions of nationhood, the way the conquest of Constantinople was presented as the zenith of an idealized age of conquest, as this was termed by one of the leading intellectuals of the period, but no time here to get into any detail of this. What I want to highlight is rather the irony in this huge gap between what we know of the building at the time of its conversion, following its conversion, and how this conversion and its primary agent, Mehmed II, are imagined by modern day supporters of the conversion of the museum into a mosque. Now, if we were to trace the information on the visual structure of the Hagia Sophia, of the interior, in the later 15th century, we would be seeing something like this, not completely similar to what we have on the screen here. We would be finding a highly hybrid space. What we have here is an early 18th century view. What I'm describing is basically the decades after its conversion. The sanctuary was stripped of its relics, its icons, its furnishings related to Christian liturgy. It was endowed with the most basic requirements of the Muslim congregation, so namely a marble mihrab and a pulpit, and a number of Muslim relics and victory emblems. The majority of the figural mosaics remained intact, including such potent images as the images of Virgin and Christ over the apse, and the image of Christ Pantocrator over at the center of the main dome, which remained in place until the turn of the 17th century. The very earliest evidence we have for Arabic inscriptions within the building, apart from those on the praying niche, on the mihrab, date from the reign of Mehmed's successor, Bayezid, from the turn of the 16th century. A similar coexistence of potent symbols marked the building's exterior. The cross atop the dome was removed along with the bells of the bell tower. A wooden minaret was built, later rebuilt in brick. The belfry remained intact into the 17th century. So overall, in the early stages of its conversion, and this is exactly the period that is seen as the basis of the present day conversion into a mosque, the building preserved its Byzantine Christian identity to a remarkable degree. These images that I have here from around 1480 and 1490, one of them showing a cross atop the dome and a crescent atop the single minaret, The other one featuring a composite cross and crescent symbol atop the minaret of the building, the new minaret. You probably can't see it very well here, are not realistic representations in the conventional sense, but I would say they are not completely off the mark. The limited nature of these interventions into the later 16th century was due neither to lack of resources nor due to neglect. Rather, this was one mode of responding on the part of the Ottoman patrons and audiences to the Byzantine legacy. So the mechanisms through which this has become beyond imagination to many onlookers today is, I think, worth probing further. The information on the mosaics being visible into the early 18th century was revealed first by Cyril Mango in the 1960s. Further documentation and interpretation was offered by Gülru Necipoğlu in the 1990s, but the popular understanding still goes that because figural imagery is not allowed in Muslim spaces of worship, the moment of conversion was also the moment when Hagia Sophia became simply a shell to contain symbols of Muslim presence and conquest. The modern Islamist imagination of the monument as essentially an empty shell as far as the Byzantine past is concerned, a shell that contains a massive Islamic symbolism and a number of objects of the Ottoman legacy, I think is another notion that is worth probing further. The awareness of the Byzantine past is legible throughout the Ottoman era in Ottoman documents, whether written or visual or architectural. Among these are references to the monument, for example, in the foundation deed, the very legal document that made it a mosque upon the Ottoman takeover of the city as the adorned church, Kenise-i Monakkasha. Such as the Ottoman authors who into the early decades of the 16th century described the Proconnesian marble floor revetments, likening them to pure water, to marble waves, to the way we see, establishing a connection to an age-old understanding of the marbles through the Roman and Byzantine eras. And that's a topic that Fabio Berri and more recently Bisera Pencheva has worked on. One can mention the 17th century polymath Hezarfen Hüseyin, who explained the significance of the building with a reference to its name, which he translated into Turkish as Ilahi Hikmet, Hagia Sophia. Or we see these in the fabric of the building, late in my slides, the fabric of the building and in the classicizing features of 16th century additions and Ottoman uses of spolia, which betray an intimate knowledge of the building's materiality. Ottoman discourses on the Hagia Sophia would reveal a comparable complexity and again changes throughout the early modern era. Literary and historical works highlight the imperial associations connected to the monument. They underline its Muslim veneration from the Umayyad times onwards and connect to that veneration, whose first examples we see contemporaneous with the first Umayyad sieges of Constantinople. They do highlight expansionist ideals as projected on Constantinople and its primary monument. At the same time, they attest to the antiquarian admiration of the authors and capture knowledge of and responses to the Byzantine building symbolism and its materiality. They capture the architectural dialogue and competition that Ottoman patrons and architects articulated in their building projects and writings on these. And all this that I have presented is perhaps a tiny part of what the rich body of writings on the monuments in Turkish through the Ottoman past, and as seen here also in the space of the city, present in terms of the Ottoman reactions to reckonings with and dialogues with the Hagia Sophia. Challenges of the present situation are many, and part of it, to my mind, is making the layered and multiple pasts of the monument alongside a historicized understanding of Ottoman interventions accessible to a broader public. I'd like to think in the long term and see this most recent series of interventions as one moment in the long history of the building. And it's my conviction that a more egalitarian, inclusivist reckoning with its multiple pasts will be possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Chidem.
Share and I introduce.
Chidem, we had to make a little change in the order of speakers. Sarah had a connection, but she's here now, and so we can maybe insert her presentation now a little late. But,
sure.
And
yes.
then,
so okay. Shall I introduce her?
If you want, or I can introduce her. I'll introduce her since I'm ready.
Okay, go ahead.
So, Bisera Pencheva is professor of medieval art in the artistry department at Stanford University, whose innovative work brings acoustics, art, and music in the exploration of medieval architecture and the ritual. If you unmute yourself, we will hear you.
Morning, everyone. I'm sorry for the delay. I'm glad I joined you, and I'll move straight into my presentation. My focus today is the energy in Hagia Sophia under the main dome, in Greek called Kalichoros, and I will speak on the basis of the 6th century ekphrasis. So I'll use a lot of quotes from the ekphrasis in order to show how a particular sensitivity to this void is cultivated in Byzantine culture in the 6th century, which had a tremendous impact in the later periods. And also it shows about this distance between us and them, between the past and the present, and how we can develop an empathy in order to see to an extent with medieval eyes. So I start with the space under the dome. The Greeks called it the beautiful choros, Kalichoros. Choros is related to performance space as well as the action of singing and dancing. It has roots in archaic Greek culture, and it continues within the Christianization and Byzantine culture, and is related mostly to chant in this later period. To chant, but the energy, the movement in space is still there. So how to see something that to us looks as inanimate and inert, like the space of a building, and show how it is animated and perceived and animated through human presence in space, through light and sound. So when Procopius describes the Kalichoros, he says the following: "And whenever anyone enters this church to pray, he understands at once that it is not by any human power or skill, but by the influence of God, that this work has been so finely tuned. And so his mind is lifted up towards God, an exalted feeling that God cannot be far away, but must especially love to dwell in this place which he has chosen, end of quote. So we have three energies or dynamic movements in this description: humanity lifting their gaze up towards the dome, divinity descending down with this notion of divinity that loves to dwell. Emphilochorein is the Greek term, loves to dwell in this space. And this is connected, these two movements, up and down, is enveloped in a circular movement, the Horos movement, because it says the building is so finely turned. And this is the notion of the potter's wheel and the turning of the wheel. And the Greek word for that is apotornefti. And so what we get in this short three-line description is this invisible energy that is present in the space, present for a 6th century viewer. The descent of the divine, the ascent of humanity, and in the process, the entire circular movement is put into presence. Now, to show that this is just not a haphazard survival of such a perception of the space and the invisible energy in the space, I'll also quote Paul the Silentiary, the other 6th century writer, who says the following about the Kalichoros. A helmet rising above into the boundless air spins Elisete it from both sides into a sphere, radiant as the heavens. It bestrides the roof of the church. So it is not a static structure that they describe. They describe something that is in motion, that the cupola is perceived as in continuous rotation. Humanity is swayed into this eternal rotation. And the rotation is very important because it speaks about the macrocosm, the cosmos, the universe with the fixed stars that rotate around their axis, and how humanity is brought in this universal movement. It's a movement that continuously produces music. This is the music of the spheres, the cosmic music, which humanity cannot hear. But already within the ekphrasis of Paul the Silentiary and Procopius, we get the sense, this development of the aesthetic of continuous movement. Now, what is in continuous movement? It's connected not just to the stars, it's also connected to the sea. And for a city like Constantinople, Istanbul, this connection to the sea, be it through the Bosphorus, the Golden Horn, and the Horn or the Aegean, is very present. So the building also brings the aesthetic of this animate matter, waters that are alive, that move. And this is connected linguistically through the three terms that capture. Marble in Greek is marmaron, which comes from Sanskrit, and it's connected to the murmur, the glittering, iterative sound of lapping water. And that movement also creates glitter of the sun, and that is called marmarigma. So marmaron, marmarigma, and marmarigi. So these terms that capture the notion of life matter, matter that has been inspirited. And this is how Paul the Silentiary describes the marble in the space. So I will move through my slides. This is how Paul the Silentiary describes the peak of Proconnesus, soothingly spreading over the entire pavement, had gladly given its back to the life-giving mistress, the church. The softly rippling Bosphorus appears as the radiance of a dark metal that has transformed into a luminous surface. The translation of these words is complex. It all comes to the last line here that speaks about, this is not just a description of book-matched marble that has the pattern of waves. It is a description of a perceptual memory of the glittering surface of the Bosphorus that has the darkness of the abyss that then is lightened up through the softness of white wool that acquires the melting presence of gold of metal. And this is acrokelainiontus epiergenio metaro. These are the stringing of words, which is a continuous perceptual transformation, that it's no longer the essence of the material, but the appearance of the material that is at stake. So Hagia Sophia is a theater of this phenomenality of transformation. It is done in reflective surfaces, marble, polished marble, and gold mosaic, which continuously change appearance when animated, brought to life by the light of the sun in that space. The light of the sun has unifying effect. And I will quote another example from Paul the Silentiary, when he speaks about how the light of the sun brings empsychosis, brings liveliness, animation in the space, and it connects, it puts to life, it quickens to life the inanimate marble and gold, and that reflective energy, the reflected light, then makes the human presence in that space lively and full of energy. He says, the ceiling encompassing gold inlaid tesserae, whose pouring down in glittering gold streaming ray irresistibly bounces off the faces of the faithful. End of quote. So here there is this heaviness, essence of the power of the ray, the sun ray, that then enlivens both the marble and the viewer, the participants, the faithful in the space. So it is a universe that is brought to life by the presence of light that has its effect with this reflective energy that is consumed by the human bodies. And in other words, spirit that is invisible becomes alive in the transformation of inert material surfaces that are quickened to life. That the marble with the rising sun or the sun-setting sun acquires the opalescence of marmarigma of water, as well as the incandescence of molten metal. And these moments of sunrise and sunset are the most photogenic in the building, but they're moments that also coincide with the first century views of this space for the Orthodox liturgy of the early morning and Hesperinos, liturgy of the descending sun, the end of the day. These are the 2 points in which the building is used. These are also the 2 points that contemporary visitors in the 21st century had the least access, as the building was used as a museum, because the rise of the sun is impossible given the museum hours, and the sunset in, let's say, the summer months is also impossible to see because it's well beyond the closing time of the museum. So in other words, this space puts its performance of glittering light in sunrise and sunset, and of course also throughout the day. Now this there is an interrelationship between the gold and the marble and the acoustics of the space. The space is extremely reverberant, and in our modern perception, a reverberant building is perceived as alive and wet. And actually, this is how acoustic engineers characterize spaces that are alive. Most of the time, we teach in dry spaces because we want to communicate information. We are all about semantics. Hagia Sophia is all about prosody. It is the taste, the texture of words. So the gold and the marble with their reflective surfaces are one of the main causes for the long reverberation time in that space. As well as the marble and gold, the other aspect is the extreme size of the interior volume. The space, the void of Hagia is over 250,000 cubic meters. A space with large interior volume and reflective surfaces ends up with extremely reverberant acoustics. And I'm giving you here an example of the different frequencies in that space. Within the range of the human voice, of the singing voice, if we look here from 100 to a couple of kilohertz, you see that the reverberation time is approximately in its maximum 12 seconds reverberation time. What is reverberation? It's the residual energy once a signal is fired in the space. How long it takes for this energy to continuously propagate and reflect until it decreases below the level of human hearing, below 30 dB. That amount of time from the initial signal to its decrease to 30 dB, down 30 dB, is called reverberation time. And in Hagia Sophia, within the range of the human voice, it varies between 8 and 12 seconds, measured in a building empty. Now, how are medieval sources speaking about the reverberation time? Paul the Silentiary says this very evocative poetic term. He says, "Who will sing gapingly with the thundering mouths of Homer, the marble meadows solidly assembled along the walls, or the open plains of the haltingly high Naus?" In his brief 2 lines, he captures both the reflective surfaces of marble and the extreme size of this volume of this space, that the combined elements in modern understanding of acoustics results in this extremely reverberant space. Now, what I'm going to move into is the sound of this reverberant space, and I'll do it with a special Troparion. This is a poetic work that is focused on the feast of the Exaltation of the Cross, celebrated on September 14th, and it is written specifically for Hagia Sophia. And so what we are going to look at is I will move the cursor to the extent possible to show you how we move through it, and we'll focus on these great leaps and the effect of these leaps to hearing. So I will start. Going to play the whole Troparion. You can listen to it. It's available through Capella Romana as well as Amazon. So what I want to focus on. So this Troparion says, Lord, bless your people and save your inheritance. So as you see in the hymn, it is written in mode 1, and it expands in a series of waves. But what is particularly special that in one word, evlogison, it reaches, so mode 1, authentic, it has its final D. What you see here is first leaps of fourth that attack the acoustics of the dome, and then it expands to the final D at the high range, and then it goes one note above to E. So in that moment, there is this glittering aesthetic as an acoustic phenomenon that develops in the space, and it starts raining down, this reflective energy starts raining down from the dome. There is a Byzantine understanding of this raining aesthetic with the divine that becomes present as a golden rain in the space. Why is this important? Because in the 6th century, Hagia Sophia used phenomenality, phenomena, in order to make divine presence perceptible in the space through the light and its reflection, the polished surfaces, the walls, but even more importantly, through the human agency, the agency of chant, which made the acoustic golden rain become as a phenomenon of divine presence. And in this particular Troparion, that phenomenon coincides with the word may you bless. So may you bless becomes divine presence, invisible as an acoustic energy raining from the dome. And I'll conclude with a statement from Marion. So Marion is a phenomenologist who had focused mostly at the manifestation of the metaphysical through the image. And what I would like to expand is how Marion actually can relate to another aspect of a manifestation of the divine, and that is through sound. In an essay that is written about how the mysterion, how divine presence, the mystery, is manifested in the letters of the Apostle Paul, he speaks about how the women coming through to the tomb of Christ, seeking Christ in the tomb, cannot find him. And the angel says, who are you looking? Basically, at this moment, he says there is a distinction between the way a philosopher will search for wisdom as opposed to a Christian searching for wisdom. He says, you're looking for a dead body, and that's why you're not finding, because the question you ask is not what you're going to find. So if you're looking for the divine, it's something else. And why does he say, how does Marion explain, continue further, saying that the divine, the image of the divine, has to be from the point of view of the divine. The divine is not a creature. The divine is the energy that underscores all creation. And he says one needs a radical anamorphosis. The image of the divine could not be something that is in front of us, and we are the subject of the gaze. The image of the divine is what encompasses. And this is the aspect of what encompasses that Hagia Sophia activates the divine image through sound and light, and especially through sound, because it's a reverberant, encompassing sound. It puts the faithful in the phenomenon of the image, in the enveloping presence of the energy that underscores all creation. And I'll finish here.
Thank you very much. Now we will go back to the original speakers order and the chronological order. So our next speaker is Belgin Turan Özkaya. She's currently finishing her book, Itinerant Objects, British Museum and the Ottoman Response to Antiquity. She's a professor of architectural history in the Department of Architecture at Middle East Technical University. Belgin.
Thank you, Esra. Let me share my screen. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, then I start. In the last decades in architectural historiography, we have been studying blurred boundaries, intertwined cultures, and global patterns. The common point of all these researchers is a pronounced desire to go beyond established boundaries, particularly the national ones, that marked not only the 19th century, the age of colonial empires and nascent nationalisms, but also the following century of emerging post-colonial polities. Once disentangled from the homogenizing narratives of all such imagined communities, in Benedict Anderson's words, architecture, which is inherently ambiguous and polysemic, may provide an occasion to detect continuities, recurring patterns, and connections between what are perceived as radically different. Along those lines, the recent global turn in architectural history foregrounded synchronic relational approaches that extend over vast geographical and cultural territories and disclosed recurring patterns in unexpected geographic and temporal coordinates. More importantly, for my purposes here, the panoramic view of global histories is accompanied by a diachronic tendency to go deep into the specific histories of single buildings and sites, to produce biographies of buildings in longue durée, often bridging successive cultural contexts that might have been conventionally perceived as unrelated. This is in line with recent scholarship on Eastern Mediterranean and West Asia, where instead of sharp breaks and clean starts, the continuities, borrowings, and adaptations between Greco-Roman, Byzantine, and Islamic cultures are traced, which productively shed light on the latter. Hagia Sophia, sorry, it doesn't work for some reason. Okay. Hagia Sophia, built on the site of demolished earlier churches and survived as a Byzantine cathedral for centuries, which also had a life as a major religious site during the Ottoman era, evidently is a very good example of this. The continuity that is at issue is not only material, the actual physical survival of the building, but also discursive. As shown by Gülü Necipoğlu, Ottomans not only appropriated and adapted the site and its narratives according to their own needs, but they themselves were transformed in the process. Nothing demonstrates this better than the long shadow Hagia Sophia had cast on later Ottoman mosques, for which it constituted an unsurpassable model. From that perspective, the Ottoman appropriation of Hagia Sophia is an act of spoliation, a violent break that also meant continuity and preservation on a different level. But of course, Hagia Sophia had been neither a cathedral nor a mosque, but a museum and a cultural heritage site almost for a century, when its status was changed into mosque again in July 2020, with a ruling of the Turkish Council of State and the endorsement of the president. Amid the polarizations caused by the ensued controversy in Turkey, particularly between secularists and Islamists, Hagia Sophia's conversion into museum is attributed exclusively to Turkish Republican authorities, overlooking its gradual transformation into a monument in the Ottoman era. Robert Nelson had already shown us the creation and reception of Hagia Sophia as a modern monument, alongside an emerging interest in Byzantine past in 19th and 20th century Europe and US. Similarly, Temeldem wrote about the transformation of it into a site to visit, particularly by foreign travelers in the Ottoman context. Along those lines, I too would argue that apart from its life as a major religious and civic complex with a stupendous library and schools, a parallel process of monumental taking place already in the 19th century, as now was started to be seen as an example of Asar-ı Atika and Asar-ı Nefise, the developing concepts of ancient and artistic works. If Gaspare Fossati's extensive depictions of Hagia Sophia, occasioned by his employment by the Ottoman court for repairs in the 1840s, alongside Wilhelm Salzenberg's work on its decoration, were turning points in Hagia Sophia's life as a monument, recording Byzantine art and architecture would be taken up by Ottoman intelligentsia too. Celal Esat wrote about Hagia Sophia as a Byzantine edifice in detail, first in Ottoman, then French. Mehmet Ziya, on the other hand, published a monograph on Hagia Mosque with extensive descriptions of its Byzantine imagery, which were discovered in 1876, left exposed and documented by the Imperial Museum, the images of which were used also in Abdülhamid II's gift albums to Britain and the US. In the 19th century, Hagia Sophia, alongside other mosques and the Imperial Museum, a small collection of particularly Greco-Roman and Byzantine antiquities, amassed in another spoliated Byzantine church, Hagia Irene, and the formal imperial palace Topkapı had already become principal tourist destinations. By the 1890s, a specific section was already in place for foreign visitors, which was furnished with sofas and damask chairs, and even a fee was presumably being charged. The Ottoman state archives are full of petitions for permission to visit, paint, photograph, and survey Hagia Sophia, not only by foreigners, but also Ottoman Muslims, such as the painter Şevket Bey, a graduate of Academy of Fine Arts, who petitioned for the extension of his permit to other mosques for the exhibition he was preparing in 1904. After 1861, for the regular visitors, special permit was not even required. During all this time, the building's immediate surroundings were organized and paved, giving it a more urban, monumental look. The parallel life and perception of Hagia Sophia as a historic and aesthetic monument, however, did not follow a linear trajectory. While in the 1890s, scholarly works on it as an example of Byzantine and Christian architecture could be presented to the Ottoman court, later there were attempts to ban the circulation of postcards depicting it as it was during what they called the Eastern Empire, meaning without minarets, but with a cross and bell tower. Yet the Hagia Sophia, the image of Hagia Sophia was already part of mass culture. Souvenirs were being imported, as in the case of the tobacco cases that came from Trieste. The recent conversion of Hagia Sophia into mosque again, alongside all the other recent assaults on cultural heritage throughout the world, shows us that the concept of monument or cultural heritage in today's terminology that we may trace back to the Ottoman era is now in crisis. The value of Hagia Sophia as common heritage, a UNESCO World Heritage Site beyond regional and national divides, is being contested. In the face of recent critical literature, such as the work of Lynn Meskel, arguing that the massive bureaucratic machine of UNESCO, rather than uniting, is actually consolidating national boundaries and is dominated by a few hegemonic centers, what can be done? Perhaps we may start from how we write our histories. Instead of exclusionary narratives that focus on single periods, cultures, and identities at the expense of others, that end up building boundaries along religious and national divides, we may insist on nuanced and pluralistic histories that disclose continuities and connections between seemingly different cultures. When we start to see Hagia Sophia holistically, with all its faces that connect different periods, cultures, functions, and meanings, Byzantine as much as Ottoman, mosque as much as church, secular as much as sacred, we may be ready for new transnational values, including a genuine and more convincing concept of cultural heritage. Thank you. Now let me introduce Peter. Peter Christensen is Associate Professor of Art History at the University of Rochester with a specialization in modern architectural and environmental history, particularly of Germany, Central Europe, and the Middle East.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me and see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Belgin. Well, the situation surrounding Hagia Sophia is certainly noteworthy vis-a-vis the building's scale, location, and historical significance. There are, in fact, many architectural transformations in the Ottoman Empire's intertwined history with Christianity that speak to this instance in instructive ways. Some of the least studied examples are those of Hungary. So in the 145-year period between the Ottoman annexation of Buda, or Budapest today, in 1541, and their expulsion from Magyar lands in 1686, Ottoman settlers established about a dozen highly fortified enclaves in the region. The center of Ottoman culture in Hungary was in southern Transdanubia, specifically around the cities of Pécs and Szigetfár, so right here, where, incidentally, Ottoman architectural heritage is still at its most visible. Each of the two cities has two structures previously used as mosques, with one in Pécs remaining as such. I would like to introduce one in each of these two cities so as to explore their heuristic opportunities for our larger discussion today. On the left, the downtown Kandlamas Church of the Blessed Virgin Mary, formerly the Mosque of Gazi Pasha Kazim in Pécs, and the Church of St. Rochus, formerly the Mosque of Alipasha in nearby Szigetfár. The Gadikasi Mosque of Pécs was built on the site of St. Bartholomew's Church in the city center between 1570 and 1580, just 4 years after the Ottoman army mounted a hard-won victory over the region in 1566. The square-shaped dome mosque and its one minaret, appropriated from the church's medieval bell tower, were at least in part constructed with spoliated stones from the church's ruins, with the walls of the aisles forming part of a circumscribing fence around the mosque. When the mosque was recaptured by Habsburg armies in 1686, the minaret and the porch were destroyed. Convention held that shortly after recapture and the expulsion of the Muslim community, these edifices would be handed over to Jesuit administrators. By the 1730s, adaptive reuse efforts were underway. In Pécs, or Fünfkirchen as it was known in German, this meant the demolition of the fence and the outfitting of the mosque interior with a fresco program, the plastering of the stone facade, the creation of a new bell tower and an extruded dome, and the expansion on the church's northern footprint roughly to its original size. The Baroque character of the mosque was nevertheless erased during a short spurt of restoration efforts in the 1960s and 70s, and that is what you see on the left, roughly returning the monument to its appearance under the Ottomans, while still functioning as a Catholic church to this day. Incidentally, in 2010, Pécs held the distinction of the European Capital of Culture alongside Istanbul, and the mosque served as a focal point in the city's claims to multiculturalism and, as it touted, as the gateway of the EU to the Balkans. In Szigetfár, however, the Baroque stylistic transformation was kept intact. The mosque was likely built a few years after that of Pécs. Evliya Çelebi dates it to 1588 and may have employed the same builders, as evinced by the very striking similarities of the Muqarnas. The Alipasha Mosque, however, was built anew and with bricks rather than stone. After its recapture in 1689, the mosque was used as a storehouse for gunpowder, and from 1712 onwards as a Catholic church. Hungarian legend has it that the brick minaret came down as a result of being struck by a lightning bolt in 1715. Its brick walls were then plastered, its portal destroyed, its dome covered, and its southern Qibla wall re-articulated with auxiliary church spaces. And here you see the original plan of the porch and where the minaret would have been, and of course, the mihrab. The conversion was also further elaborated by a fresco program by the painter Stefan Dorfmeister in 1788, depicting the Habsburg loss and eventual recapture of the fortress at Szigetvár a century prior. The iconographic vignettes depict Suleiman the Magnificent and his catafalque. Suleiman, of course, died just days before the successful capture of the fortress at Szigetvár in 1566. It also shows his opposing commander, Nicolas Zrínyi, and the Habsburg colonel, Gabriele Vecchi, who would recapture the fortress in 1689. The main aspect of the fresco's composition is the oppositional contrast between the cruelty of what were called pagans, i.e. the Muslims, on the one side of the dome, and the mercy of the Christians on the other. Like the Gadikasi Mosque, the church was restored in the 1960s, but in this instance, its Baroque identity retained. The city of Szigetvár, whose capture was to be the final step in Suleiman the Magnificent's quest to seize Vienna and to convert St. Stephen's Cathedral to a mosque, has taken on a role in the nationalist myths of not one, but three states, far exceeding its status as a poor regional town in southern Hungary. For Hungarians, the myth is most widely conjured in the epic poetry of a descendant of Zrínyi, who shared his name entitled The Siege of Sziget, first published in 1651. It is a poem firmly rooted in the Catholic Christian Weltanschauung tradition, oriented towards questions of divine providence and religious virtue. For neighboring Croatians, who count Zrínyi and his army as part of their own Slavonian heritage, the myth of the city is both firmly rooted in Ivan Zakic's 1876 Nikola Subic Zrinski, the most widely performed of all Croatian operas, which firmly occupies the discursive domain of nationalism, in which honor, glory, and sacrifice are oriented primarily towards other global imagined communities and kind of proto-nationalist thinking. For Turks, Szigetvár holds the distinction of being the site where Suleiman gave his final proclamation to his soldiers, memorialized in the final episode of the popular Turkish TV program Magnificent Century, and where his entrails, including his heart, are ostensibly buried. The construction of a Turkish-Hungarian friendship park and the very recent discovery of remnants of the Ottoman encampment outside the fortress, known as Turbek, has only enhanced the site's allure as a pilgrimage site with neo-Ottoman allure, and perhaps as a fertile site for the growth of the Turanism movement, which seeks to arouse the cultural allegiance among the descendants of Mongol tribes, which of course includes both Catholic Hungarians and Muslim Turks. The issue of the camouflage of Szigetvár's parish church brings me to a final point. Zrínyi, in his epic poem, exhibits a keen interest in the themes of miscegenation and misrecognition, conjuring up instances of confusion stemming from the surprising physiognomic similarities of Turks and Magyars. Zrínyi describes instances in his poem of Turks not being able to recognize Hungarians and vice versa, of soldiers taking the clothes off of the dead or wounded of opposing soldiers and wearing them as a kind of military religious drag, so as to gain an advantage on the battlefield. I wonder then if Zrínyi too would have likened the plaster and frescoes of the town's mosque cum church as akin to this sartorial drag. It too cloaks its body in a form of visual code betraying but never eradicating the truth of the body. Thank you. And with that, I'd like to introduce Nicos Magoliotis. He is a PhD candidate at the ETH Zurich. His research focuses on the architecture of Greece from the mid-18th to the early 20th centuries. Thank you, Nicos.
Hello, I hope you can see my slides. Thank you, Peter, for the introduction. And thank you for making the perfect introduction by talking about national myths and epic poems. This brings me closer to what I'm going to talk about. So let me cut to the chase. On July 10th, the New York Times reported on the reactions to the transformation of Hagia Sophia into a mosque. Next to the concerns raised by art historians and conservationists and the chorus of dismay from religious and political leaders around the world, the article mentioned that, I quote, the idea of converting Hagia Sophia back into a mosque prompted immediate pushback from Greece, which sees itself as the heir to the Byzantine Empire, end quote. And I would add that this was a somewhat moderate description of the absurdity that erupted in Greek media around the same time. So on the same day, the popular Greek historian Eleni Glikadzi Arveler appeared on national television and said the following, I quote, "For me, the transformation of the Hagia Sophia into a mosque is the second fall of Constantinople. If I hear that the mosaics of Hagia Sophia are crying, I will not be surprised. And I won't ask for whom the bells toll mournfully. They will toll for all of Christendom," end quote. A historian concluded her rather inflammatory statement by affirming, I quote again, that the Greek people will always say, "Holy Mary, do not cry. With years and with time, Constantinople and the Hagia Sophia will be ours once more," end quote. Now, this obscure statement was a direct reference to a well-known piece of Greek nationalist folklore, a 19th century folk song that prophesied an eventual Greek reconquest of Istanbul and Hagia Sophia, a myth that has been at the core of Greek religious fundamentalism and nationalism for about 2 centuries. The phrase, "ours once more," stemmed from a folk song titled "The Fall of Constantinople," first published in 1825 in an early ethnographic survey of Greek popular poetry by Claude Charles Fouriel. The song was allegedly sung by Greeks as they fought for independence from the Ottomans in the 1820s, but referred to historical events of 4 centuries ago. So it told the story of the fall of Constantinople in 1453 from the point of view of the Byzantines. Gathered in the Hagia Sophia, the Christians mourned over the imminent loss of their beloved city and church and rushed to save its holy relics. In the final verses, Holy Mary appears. Upon seeing what was happening, her icons inside the church burst into tears. And at that moment, a voice from the heavens comforts her by saying, "Hush, Holy Mary, don't cry, don't shed your tears. With years and time, these will be yours once more." Now, paraphrased into "ours once more," this phrase came to embody the Greek nationalist ambition of a reconquest of the former grounds of Byzantium, the Great Idea, as it was called. "Ours once more" became the leitmotif of Greek irredentism, contributing to a diachronically turbulent relation with Turkey until the early 20th century. The 1920s gave an end to that dangerous fantasy, but unfortunately, as we can see, it still resurfaces nowadays in populist rhetoric in moments of crisis. Now back to the original song for a moment. After its first appearance in a French publication in 1825, it was hailed by Greek scholars as an expression of popular patriotism and republished numerously. The song eventually became part of the canon of Greek folklore within the then developing field of philological ethnography. In 19th century Greece, ethnography and folklore studies developed in parallel with archaeology, and both epistemes served the construction of a modern Greek identity. Archaeologists obviously worked primarily with visible and tangible material artifacts, the object that we commonly refer to as antiquities or monuments. Ethnographers, on the contrary, worked with more elusive, immaterial pieces of evidence, folk songs, fairy tales, popular sayings, and all of the things that we call oral tradition or folklore. In an attempt to legitimize this new field of research and its elusive materials, the prominent 19th century Greek folklorist Nicos Magoliotis played on this contrast with archaeology. So next to the historically valued material monuments, he placed what he called the monuments of the spoken word. That is, oral popular traditions transmitted from generation to generation, and therefore, according to Magoliotis, bearing historical memory just like material artifacts. Now, for Magoliotis, the material artifact of a monument was almost as important as the popular lore that surrounded it, an epistemological paradigm that was crucial for how Hagia Sophia was treated by Greek scholars. Despite its symbolical value for the Greeks, Hagia Sophia stands outside their national borders and could not be easily studied as a material artifact. But oral traditions and popular myths about the monument seem to abound within the country, and many of them served the nationalist narrative. Throughout the 19th and early 20th century, and while French, Swiss, American, Turkish, and other scholars studied the architecture and the artworks of the Hagia Sophia, Greek scholars focused mostly on documenting oral traditions about the monuments, fairy tales, folk songs, and any piece of folklore that vindicated the Greek claim over the monument. To return to Magoliotis' distinction, I would argue that many Greek scholars have treated the Hagia Sophia more as a monument of the word than a built monument of art and architecture. So an object of national folklore rather than architectural history. A perfect example of this is this book from 1918 titled Symbols of National Faith, Constantinople and Hagia Sophia. Its pages are filled with nationally and religiously charged folkloric myths, from a petrified Byzantine emperor coming back to life in order to reconquer Constantinople, to half-fried fish that refuse to die until the city returns to Christian hands. Needless to say, the folk song about the fall of Constantinople and the prophecy of ours once more features prominently. The publication did contain some historical sources on the construction of Hagia Sophia, but not much on its actual form or its later history. Essentially, it tells us little about the architecture of the monument, but a lot about its authors and how they perceived it. It is thus perhaps unsurprising that in 2020, a Greek historian tried to appeal to TV audiences by predicting that the mosaics of Hagia Sophia will start crying, rather than talk about what these mosaics actually depict, who made them originally, who rediscovered them, and what will happen to them in the present circumstance. For many Greeks, the Hagia Sophia is not an architectural monument, but an object of national and religious desire, obscure folklore and revanchist prophecies. As such, it is not discussed as a site of world heritage, but as something that is or supposedly has to be ours. The ideological constructs that perpetuated such dangerous claims have already been decoded by historians and critical thinkers. I show here Michael Herzfeld's classic book of 1982, and there are of course many that followed. But the fact that they still resurface, and through the words of historians, requires that we revisit such histories. Now, thank you. I will stop sharing my screen and present the next speaker. Ezra Akçan is a professor in the Department of Architecture and the director of IES at Einaudi Center for International Studies at Cornell University. And she works on intertwined architectural and urban histories of Europe and West Asia. Ezra, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, wonderful. So my presentation takes us to the 20th century when Hagia Sophia was converted into a museum. I argue that this museum could have been made a symbol of international friendship and accountability, a unique potential that is now lost. Commentators remarked that the recent opening ceremony was deliberately organized on the anniversary of the League of Nations Lausanne Treaty. In addition to marking Turkey as a newly founded nation state, This treaty legalized the exchange of populations that mandated the compulsory migration of all Christian Greeks and Muslim Turks to their respective new nation states. Greece's Muslim population decreased from 20 to 6%, Turkey's non-Muslim population decreased from 20 to 2.5%. Lord Curzon, who coordinated the Lausanne Conference, advocated this enforced migration as the unmixing of peoples. A British imperialist in India, he was no stranger to dividing peoples based on his perceived ideas about religion and race, as he had already partitioned Bengal. Lord Curzon was also specifically invested in Hagia Sophia. In his report, Future of Constantinople of 1919, he suggested to convert Hagia Sophia from a mosque into a church, following the Santa Sofia Redemption Committee that was demanding the building's resacralization. Against the will of organizations such as the Redemption Committee, Hagia Sophia was not converted into a church, but the Lausanne Treaty induced irreversible consequences on multiculturalism. It divided the exchangeable populations residing in thousands of villages and towns across the lands into two purified categories, which assumed the alignment of religion, nation, and territory, regardless of the actual diversity of peoples that did not fit into the treaty's flattened out categories, and whether there were hostile or peaceful relations on the ground. You can see my screen advance, yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, yes. The history of this compulsory mass migration has been written separately from the nationalist perspectives of Greece and Turkey as a cure to a problem rather than the cause of countless traumas, as an agreement that founded the nation states rather than one that unjustifiably ripped people apart. However, the more I traced the transportation paths and read the suffering and pain in the migrant testimonies, the more I came to identify this exchange as state violence and international law viciousness. The authorities in both countries treated resettlement after exchange as a top-down demographic engineering device and turned the expulsion of Christians and Muslims into state apparatuses of Turkification and Hellenization. Hagia Sophia's becoming a museum a decade after the Lausanne Treaty may be interpreted as a brief moment of international friendship. After the transportation of enforced migrants, the governments of Greece and Turkey went back and forth about their remaining properties and cultural heritage, eventually signing the treaties of friendship in 1930. While precise reasons are hard to trace, it was in the context and spirit of this friendship agreement that the Christian symbols in Hagia Sophia, which had been covered with plaster over time, started being revealed in 1931. The Erdoganist historiography claims that the Byzantinist art historian Thomas Whittemore and his rich American supporters swayed Atatürk to turn the building into a museum. This claim is meant to discredit the museum as a cultural imperialist intervention. But actually, in the 1930s, the existence of mosaics under plaster were already well known, at least from the 18th century drawings. During the renovation under Abdülmecit's patronage, the Fossati brothers had revealed, restored, and prepared drawings of the mosaics before covering them back up. Travelers have visited and rendered these symbols during this renovation. A new episode in the building's periodic restoration throughout the Ottoman Empire was already in place. Many commentators were actually impressed with Hagia Sophia for its unified, universalizing space under one dome and its light, a character that was underlined in its first photographs as a museum. Local intellectuals such as Osman Hamdi's successor, Halil Ethem, who had been influential in the founding of the National Museum and the growth of archaeology during the Ottoman Empire, and who continued to promote museology and archaeology in the new republic, influenced Hagia Sophia's new status. The official decree justified the conversion into a museum by citing the building's, quote, historical significance as a unique monument, and in order to grant humanity with a new center of knowledge, end of quote. In other words, the Hagia Sophia Museum would be a site for credible international research and education of both Byzantine and Ottoman heritage against the 19th century Orientalists who never examined the building on site, and answering the long-standing demands of scholars who could not get permission to enter the building either as a church or a mosque. The Turkish architects at the time did not oppose to the museum decision, but instead strengthened the nationalist historiography by identifying Hagia Sophia as an imperfect Byzantine monument, which would have long collapsed if it was not for the love and care of the Turkish architects. Only in the 1950s and increasingly after the mid-1960s, conservative organizations and authors started to raise the demand to the building's reconversion into a mosque. The majority of these calls were penned by lawyers who did not rely on moral or architectural arguments, but appealed to the alleged illegality of the museum due to Sultan Mehmed's will as Istanbul's conqueror. Hagia Sophia as a museum was an exception because countless mosques and churches all over the lands after the population exchange remained neglected. Due to the ever-expanding Turkification ideology, the life of non-Sunni people deteriorated with tax laws, beatings of September 1955, expulsion of Istanbul Greeks in 1964, closure of theological seminary, and so on. In the midst of such hatred, xenophobia, and intolerance, Hagia Sophia had survived as a museum. Despite all its museological shortcomings, the building had served as a contact zone where art and architecture of multiple cultures and religions could be negotiated and put into dialogue. Reconversion into a mosque today erases both the secular and Christian history engraved in the building. The first architectural interventions raise concerns. A fast-produced green carpet hides the extraordinary marble floor that had served as a metaphor of seas and rivers and changes the acoustics and reflection of light. Curtains conceal the Christian symbols whose frame construction and electrical wiring must have intervened in the structure. The scaffolding tower is turned into a dominant wall of persuasion. Given this government's track record on the recent conversions of churches into mosques, there is no reason to be optimistic about architectural integrity. The experience of visiting the building also changed for women and non-Sunni populations. Erdogan's supporters defend the building's status as a mosque with stories of victory, victimhood, and revenge. With a sword in his hand, the head of religious affairs gave his first khutbah by reminding the oppression of Muslims around the world, as if today's Turkish regime has not caused the suffering of those that they deem different. In today's context, this decision is an imperial move posing as anti-imperialism, revenge posing as justice. Instead, Hagia Sophia as a museum could have been made a symbol of accountability and reconciliation in the face of historical violence. It could have been an invitation to perpetual peace so that no religion erases imperially the other with military power, and so that no nation state or international committee displaces people from their lands involuntarily. Thank you. And with that, let me introduce you to our next speaker. Mesut Dinler is an assistant professor in Politecnico di Torino, and his main research is politics of urban heritage and history of historic preservation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esra. I think you should be able to see my screen.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you again. In my presentation, before moving to the conversion of the Hagia Sophia, I would firstly like to focus on the concept of cultural heritage. I will try to present a critical approach towards cultural heritage, framing it as an actor with political power. Then I will briefly outline the history of how this power is practiced in Turkey. I believe that such a framework may help us position ourselves within the power dynamics regarding the recent conversion of the Hagia Sophia. The critical approach that I'm referring is, in fact, has developed since at least the 1970s, framing cultural heritage as the uses of past in the present. This understanding mainly suggests that the term cultural heritage does not address a building or a physical asset that we preserve and pass to next generations, but rather it addresses an idea that we design and manufacture in order either to adapt ourselves to the contemporary circumstances or to change them. Therefore, to understand the interventions to cultural heritage, we need to question who defines cultural heritage, for whom, when, and under which circumstances. A key moment towards an institutionalized operational management of cultural heritage came with the post-French Revolution global context. And in that sense, cultural heritage actually is a modern product. Also in the case of Turkey, the earliest conscious attitude towards cultural heritage emerged from within the modernization process of late Ottoman society. The first Ottoman archaeology campaigns, the first Ottoman museums, legislative arrangements that ensured the Ottoman control over findings, educational reforms in art and architecture were among the developments of this modernization process. This was the outcome of a dual process. On the one hand, this was a reaction against European colonialism, which represented itself through establishing authority over archaeological artifacts. And on the other hand, it was an attempt to get aligned with the very same colonizing power structures. However, even as early as 1908, these reforms of the Ottoman modernization were met with a strong reaction. The Young Turk Revolution of 1908 did not only enable the transition to constitutional monarchy, but it also created a social environment in which nationalist Islamic ideas could spread among intellectuals. They requested liberty, equality, and justice under a tolerant sultan who would run the country under the unifying umbrella of Islam. As a consequence, Islamic monuments gradually became defined as the cultural heritage of Turkish nation. With the foundation of the Turkish Republic, cultural heritage gained an additional layer of meaning with the secularization-oriented cultural reforms. It functioned to transform the society into a modern, secular nation state within a few decades. The ruling elite of the Turkish Republic operated cultural heritage not only to change the society, but also to represent the change of the society to foreign eyes. In the Republican era, similar to other nation states that were born out of the ruins of collapsed empires, a new past was designed with a new project of history writing that was scientifically backed up with archaeology and cultural heritage. As noted by Timothy Mitchell, the irony was that the older and more ancient these nation states rooted themselves, the more modern they would become. For instance, the foundational roots of the European nations, according to the 1910s conservative populist Young Egypt community, was in their pharaonic past. For the 1930s Iran under Reza Shah, the very same roots would be found in Persepolis. For the 1930s Turkey, on the other hand, it was the Hittites and the Sumerian past of Anatolia. For modern Turkey, cultural heritage functioned as a tool, both to create a new historic reference through archaeology and to discipline the memories of individuals. Even though archaeology helped generate a historical root for the new nation, the urban remnants of the Ottoman past was still visible in the everyday life. For this reason, the heritage regime of the Republic, which was partially inherited from the Ottoman Empire, not only generated a new prehistoric reference for the historical roots of the new nation, but it also directed and shaped the memories of the individuals of the society. The conversion of the 18th century Kurşun Lohan in Ankara to the Hittite Museum is one example of how the Republican regime operated on Ottoman memories. With the conversion of this Ottoman Han into the Hittite Museum, it became possible to generate a Turkish national identity based on prehistoric ages in an Ottoman context. Moreover, this project produced what Pierre Nora calls spaces of memory or sites of memory. Cultural heritage was the ultimate tool for the Republic to operate on memories to generate a history. The designation of the Topkapı Palace as a museum in 1924, only 1 year after the foundation of the Republic, and its opening in 1927, can be considered the most symbolic act of the Republic in this regard. Yet, a more controversial conversion project came in 1934 when the most important ceremonial mosque, the Hagia Sophia Mosque, was designated as a museum. And now, almost a century after the foundation of the Turkish Republic, we are in this panel to discuss the conversion of the Hagia Sophia back to a mosque. Indeed, this act not only marks a sharp departure for Turkey from secularism, but it also affirms that cultural heritage has political power. And for this reason, in a context like Turkey in the 2020s, where all power is concentrated in the hands of one central power structure, cultural heritage is not a question of profession or expertise anymore, but it is a question of politics and justice. For this reason, we have to clearly ask democratic redistribution of power in order to be able to react against the conversion of the Hagia Sophia. Otherwise, we may manifest the material and structural damage that the recent conversion caused, or it may cause in the future, as that many NGOs and professional organizations, even UNESCO. But without positioning ourselves against this central power, I suggest that it is not quite possible to talk about the universal value of Hagia Sophia. And this concludes my presentation. And now I will pass the screen to Mücahit Bilici. Mücahit Bilici is Associate Professor of Sociology at John Jay College and CUNY Graduate Center, and the author of Finding Mecca in America, How Islam is Becoming an American Religion.
All right. Thank you, Mesut Dinler. A quick thanks to Professor Esra Akcan and other colleagues who put together this panel, and to the panelists. I'm a sociologist by training, and on the side I write columns for a Turkish media outlet. The perspective I would like to offer here is rather contemporary and socio-political rather than historical and architectural. So my remarks are about the popular Turkish perception of Hagia Sophia. The question I would like to answer thus is this: what is the status of this historic and architectural marvel in the minds of ordinary Turkish citizens, who are mostly religious or nationalist or both at once these days? Here we are talking about the psychic legacy of the various conversions of Hagia Sophia for the Turkish conservative masses. So this is a cultural heritage of a different sort. For the ordinary religious or nationalist Turks, Hagia Sophia is neither a church nor a mosque, but a symbol of conquest. Therefore, the recent reconversion of the structure back to a mosque is less about religion and more about political sovereignty. A quick evidence for this argument is the fact that many religious people opposed or showed reluctance towards Mr. Erdogan's decision, while many secular Turks supported it. Both actions, converting the mosque into a museum in the 1930s and the museum back into a mosque, were products of executive decisions by strongman presidents. They reflect the changing political culture and the role of religion in the definition of the nation. In the last 2 decades, Turkey has been gradually moving away from the authoritarian secularism of Kemalism to an authoritarian Muslimism under Erdogan. The new Turkish nationalism is at the same time a Muslim nationalism. Therefore, as much as domestic political desires, it is a decision shaped by the international context, Turkish sovereignty, Muslim publics, developments in India, Israel, and Europe and the Mediterranean. Purely religiously motivated Muslims had difficulty understanding the rationale behind the decision. When Sayyid Said, an American Muslim leader, naively commented on the subject and expressed his objection to President Erdogan's Hagia Sophia decision, he was approaching the subject from a purely civic religious perspective. he basically said there is no compelling reason Islamically for this decision, and there are significant risks of backlash for Muslims in non-Muslim societies, and Islamophobic backlash was a serious concern. So he didn't find it a reasonable step to take. He soon, though, realized the gravity of the matter when he was publicly warned and rebuked by a Turkish-American imam, Yusuf Ziya Kavakçı, to retract his comments, and he did retract his comments. Religious nationalists, Turks who are religious and or nationalists, do not see Hagia Sophia as a matter of religious tolerance, but rather as an insult made to Turkish Muslim dignity. Its status as a museum was seen as an act of treason that would leave the Turkish ownership of Istanbul permanently incomplete. Sovereignty over Hagia Sophia was to be reasserted and restored. The addressee of the act is neither Orthodox Christianity nor the Greeks. The true target audience is Western powers and their interference in Muslim sovereignty. This is clear in the language of the figures who shaped contemporary sentiment about Hagia Sophia. I will give two quick examples, Necip Fazıl Kısakürek and Eşref Ziya Terzi. The second one probably you haven't heard before. Necip Fazıl Kısakürek was a famous poet and nationalist agitator. His lecture on Hagia Sophia, I think it appeared in Esra's presentation slides. His lecture is a well-known one and had a lasting impact on the Turkish right. The 60s and 70s were shaped by Cold War politics, where Islam was not an autonomous identity, but could only be smuggled in under the guise of Turkish nationalism as an element of Turkish identity. When in the 1980s and 90s, Islam gained relative autonomy from Turkish nationalism and the political right, the significance of Hagia Sophia should have declined. And in my opinion, it relatively did. But what kept it so alive for Erdogan is the formative cultural influences from the years of his youth. Those long repressed past influences on Erdogan, once they faced no more political resistance, simply found expression under his one-man regime. Erdogan's taste for what is great, either in music or ideology, is neither contemporary nor exactly Islamic. His favorite artists, singers, etc., all are relics from the 70s. Those familiar with Turkish popular culture will recognize Orhan Gencebay, Emel Sayın, and so on. And thanks to his monopoly on power and the machinery of mass propaganda at his disposal, he makes the people want what he wants. Necip Fazıl's influence on Erdogan's thinking about Hagia Sophia is clear. Necip Fazıl describes the Western-influenced Turks who endorsed the conversion of Hagia Sophia into a museum as internal collaborators of Western colonizers and identifies them with the syphilitic Frengi. Frengi, of course, refers to some sort of immoral West toxification, something like Garbzedegi in Persian culture, some equivalent of it. Now, I would like to show you a video. Let me do a quick share. Okay. This is, it cannot compete with the Troparion you heard earlier, but anyway.
Aylar yıllar geçti hala ağlarsın. Artık yaşlarını sil Ayasofya. O mahzun halinle yürek dağlarsın. Fethin sembolüsün bil Ayasofya. Biliriz yaranı derindir derin. Bakarsın bizlere mahzun ve serin. Gönüllerde yine aynıdır yerin.
Okay, the familiar sad Turkish music. And there is some Google Translate, it's terrible, but you can see there are tears, years, and so on. And the, okay, let's keep it short with in the interest of time. In the 1990s, there was an explosion of what was then called green pop music. The Islamists, who at the same time were still debating the religious permissibility of using musical instruments in religious songs, were at the same time giving in to the powerful currents of popular culture. Singers like Ömer Karaoğlu, Yusuf Ziya Terzi were Islamic alternatives to the pop music of the time. In an album, Bir Güneş Doğuyor, A Sun is Rising, released in 1992, Eşref Ziya Terzi included the song on Hagia Sophia. Neither the lyrics nor the music have much sophistication, but at the time it catered to a certain need. In this song, Hagia Sophia is described as still crying after those many years. Notice the similarity to what Nicos was describing about the Greek kind of popular imagination about Hagia Sophia. And now it is time to wipe away those tears. Seeing her so sad, the song says, tears at our hearts. But she should know that she is the symbol of the conquest. The lyrics go on to say, we know your wound is deep. We want the believers to congregate and pray inside you. And hence the empty shell reference that I think it was Çiğdem Kafesçioğlu. For Islamist imagination, it's an empty shell that needs to be filled with Muslim identity, some inscription of Muslim presence. So, and as for those who have insulted you, let the tongues that offended you be eaten by rabid dogs, the song says. This is quite visceral description, but this is not an kind of unusual in this context. For the average Turk who harbors a grudge against presumed Western dominance and exploitation in the Muslim world, the reconversion of Hagia Sophia was the undoing of a conquest reversed. This long-delayed gratification of Muslim sovereignty and of the conquest of Istanbul as a Turkish imperial capital is part of a promised Turkish imperial revival that finds expression in a glorification of the Ottoman past for the purposes of the political present. Okay, I will stop here. Thank you all. And the next speaker is Bülent Batuman. Batuman is an associate professor of architecture at the Department of Urban Design and Landscape Architecture at Bilkent University in Ankara. His work focuses on the politics of built environment. Bülent.
Thank you. You can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Erdogan's decision to convert the Hagia Sophia into a mosque was clearly related to his desire to stay in power under conditions of declining electoral support. But rather than the timing or the political currency of this decision, I'm interested in its relationship with architecture. I would like to propose that in order to understand the meaning of the reconversion of the Hagia Sophia, one has to consider the building's place within the Turkish conservative imagination and the role of architecture in its making. Turkish conservatism, labeled nationalist conservatism, has always been an oppositional yet hegemonic discourse, successfully blending nationalist and Islamist streams on the common ground of anti-communism. This ideological amalgam merged opposition to radical modernism and secularism, as well as any strands of leftism, while emphasizing the necessity of a powerful state to defend national unity. Hence, it was instrumental in expanding state hegemony while presenting itself as an oppositional discourse. The 16th century Ottoman Empire at the zenith of its power was the prime referent for the nationalist conservative imagination, representing the golden age of nation and Islam. The city of Istanbul and its architectural elements have been significant components in the making of the conservative imagination. Two major symbols were the conversion of the Hagia Sophia, and the desire to build a mosque in Taksim Square. It's worth noting that building a mosque in Taksim, the heart of modern Istanbul, was also a dream of Erdogan. Here we are seeing him 25 years ago, in 1994, when he was the mayor of Istanbul. It was his dream, which he finally achieved in the wake of the 2016 coup attempt. That is, one has to think the Hagia Sophia together with the Taksim Mosque as constituents of the conservative fantasy of Istanbul. The old city, today's historical peninsula, and its modern cosmopolitan district, Pera, are linked within the conservative imagination through these real and imagined buildings. The Hagia Sophia is a foundational element for the pathos of conservatism, just like the dream to build a mosque in Taksim is for its ethos. As the conquest of Istanbul is imagined as the point zero of Ottoman glory, the former is instrumental in feeling for the loss of the edifice as a mosque. So you see newspaper clips and photographs from meetings, rallies for the conversion of the Hagia Sophia. It has been, and there have been major rallies from the 50s, 60s, 70s, as Mücahit Bilici has also indicated. Meanwhile, the latter, the mosque in Taksim, is vital for envisaging a symbol inscribing Islam in the secular public space, not to mention the association of Pera with non-Muslim population of Istanbul in the early 20th century. The question then is what the relationship between the 20th century Turkish conservatism and the AKP's Islamism is. In my recent work, I have argued that the AKP's Islamist agenda should be understood as a nation rebuilding project. This project, on the one hand, has defined itself as the antithesis of the secular nation building of the early Republican period and sought to redefine the nation in Islamic terms. On the other hand, Islamic nation building under the AKP appropriated much of the tropes defined by its adversary. The crucial point here is the troubled relationship between the Turkish nation state and Islam. Turkish secularism never attempted to erase religion, but rather aimed at controlling it. This is also true in the instrumentalization of nationalist conservatism. Islam and its populist instrumentalization, especially in the hands of mainstream right-wing governments throughout the 20th century, kept the mutual relationship between the state and Islam alive. This was one of the mechanisms the AKP found at its disposal to use in reverse to remold the state, its institutions and ideology. For nationalist conservatism, the issue was to revive Islam in the nation, whereas for the AKP's Islamism, the issue is rather to reposition nation in Islam. The tropes kept alive by the state to manipulate conservative demands, such as the conversion of the Hagia Sophia, served for the absorption of Islam, therefore Islamism, by the nation state throughout the 20th century. It has recently become operational for the exact opposite. Now, it serves the absorption of nationalism and the remolding of the nation state by the AKP's Islamism. In addition to calling the national subjects to identification, an important component of nation building is seeking recognition from the external others. The cultural performances of nation building are also displays for the gaze of the Western other. One should look at the spectacle that performatively converted the Hagia Sophia into a mosque from this point of view. Official photographs showing Erdogan proudly inspecting the museum prior to its conversion are coupled by those showing him praying humbly and reciting the Quran during the first public prayer. The arrogant references to the right of the sword materialize in the act and the photographs capturing this act of the director of religious affairs giving the first sermon with a sword in his hand. What is at stake here is self-Orientalism as a conscious strategy to identify with the ahistorical Orientalist image of Ottoman glory and to utilize it as an instrument of power. Within this context, the claim to situate nation in Islam imagines the nation as a privileged component of global Islam. The Ottoman reference here is not nostalgic. What we have is the representation of the 16th century Ottoman power consciously deployed as an imperialist image. But what about the predicaments of fulfilling the desire to convert the Hagia Sophia back into a mosque? In one sense, it's a mistake to fulfill a desire that was deliberately kept unfulfilled, therefore alive for so long, as its productive effect will be lost forever. In another sense, it wouldn't really matter since desire is metonymical. It will move on to another object, possibly the Taksim Mosque, whose opening ceremony will turn into another spectacle. But perhaps what matters is that the built objects of desire prevail. They do prevail and continue to mediate the making of politics. We can only hope that the Hagia Sophia, who is now detached from the conservative obsession that has held it captive for so long, will someday become the object of a desire for friendship and understanding. Now, this concludes the presentations. Next, each presenter will respond to presentations with brief comments.
Yeah, given that we are very behind our schedule, it would be great if everyone keeps their comments to maximum 1 minute or even less, maybe.
So I hope you see my screen.
Yes.
The two questions that were asked were in terms of acoustics and the use of carpets and how carpets affect the experience of that space. So I'll bunch them in, and also there was a question about Marmaron and the Sea of Marmara, if they're related. On the first question, on acoustics, I would like to, and the Byzantine service was taking place in this space, in the Kalichoros, the building itself could contain up to 16,000 people. So if the service is completely crowded, it means that the entire floor will be covered by people. So there will be no reflections from the floor, which means that 12 seconds reverberation time will be reduced, probably at the scale 6 to 8 seconds with the building completely full. What it means is that most of the reflections that will take place in the building are from the higher elements, the higher levels of the building, which means the walls and the dome. And the dome plays an amazing role. So the reason I bring this image is because there are liturgical furnishings that have not survived, and there was an ambo, which means 2 staircases that lead to a platform. When the elite choir performs, and these are 12 people, the entire body of this choir is actually 25 people, but only half performs on two weekly periods. So when they go up this platform, they stand at the top of the platform and they exhale their energy upwards towards the dome. And this is the moment in which the acoustics of the building are fully activated. And that's the reason I brought your attention to these leaps, because these jumps of a fourth, they attack the dome, and you can see these attacks are repeated. And so the dome starts to produce this golden rain in the space, making the divinity present as a phenomenality, as sound. And I'm bringing these elements because one of the things that the building had taught me through the years is that how much our study of architecture and art is so materialistic. We focus on the materials, we focus on the engineering, what the walls are made of, how they stand, and we place less attention of the instrumentality of what this void that is contained by the walls is doing. And so these aspects are very important. We focus on meaning, while in fact so much about this architecture is trying to teach us something else. It's about experience. And I'll finish with a quote that is from Maximus the Confessor, who wrote, he was a courtier, eventually became a martyr and saint, but he was intimately connected to that space. And the type of theology he wrote is very important to give us a glimpse about a different value system in which not semantics, but experience is placed at the forefront. So he says, the word knows of 2 kinds of knowledge of the divine, a relative one rooted only in reason and ideas and lacking in the kind of sensual perception gained through the energies of knowledge through experience. Such relative knowledge, that's our contemporary knowledge, is what we use to order our affairs in our present life. By contrast, there is that truly authentic knowledge gained only by actual experience, apart from reason and ideas, which provides a total sensual perception of the known object through a participation by grace. By this latter knowledge, we attain in the future state the supernatural deification that remains unceasingly in effect. End of quote. So here we have what is valued is pira and aesthesis, experience and aesthetics. And this experience and aesthetics, I want to show you once again here with how they sing. Not only the space is reverberant, but as they sing, they stretch the words by introducing non-semantic syllables like this he that cuts into the word Kyrios, Lord, or here, and this is done all throughout the singing, which means that non-semantic vocables that are intertwined with the word makes the semantics difficult to enter, and instead they focus the attention on the taste of sound. And this is probably one of the greatest lessons that interaction with this building gives. It's a criticism also on our times, not meaning but experience. So what we're losing with this reconversion, among many other things, is the experience. It has already been undermined by purely secular definition of that space. And I will finish here that one of the film that was shown in little segments, it used actually the footage from our film, The Voice of Hagia Sophia. There is very little good footage online about Hagia Sophia, and our film is actually one of the most prominent out there and has been used both by Greek and Turkish sources for their own needs. So I'll stop here.
Thank you. I think Christina, you're next.
Hi. Hi. So I just want to thank the organizers and also the presenters for this webinar. I've learned so much, and so I feel like I don't have too much to add. I answered my question privately. A wonderful question about whether Turdat, the architect, made any aesthetic choices in his structural intervention into Hagia Sophia, which is a tricky question because it presupposes we know what's structural and what's aesthetic for somebody living in the late 10th, early 11th century. But I answered that privately, and I wanted instead to just ask quickly Nicos a question, if I could. I don't know, is this the right time to do that? Can I?
Yes.
Okay. Nicos, so I really enjoyed your presentation about the kind of emergence of Hagia Sophia in national folklore and in Greek folklore. And I wonder if you came across anything about the Armenian architect Turdat in that work. So I went.
No, not at all. Yeah, if that answers the question. Yeah, no, I haven't come across references to Armenian architects. No, not at all.
Interesting.
But then again, the book I was talking about is a book of, it's a book of Greek folk poetry documented in the 1820s at a time when the Greeks were trying to form a national identity that was quite exclusivist. So I would say that nuances like this would have been somehow erased. But then again, not to my knowledge would be the answer. Yeah, but thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Maybe we can continue with Maria.
Yes, I would like again also to thank everyone for this very rich array of presentations, and I would like to address a couple of questions that were sort of addressed to me, and they have to do about my perceived fear that Byzantine studies doesn't have a good solid future in Turkey, and I surely hope this is not the case. My main concern, though, is that the conversion of Hagia Sophia into a mosque, the covering of its mosaics, along with the fact that Hagia Sophia in Trebizond was converted into a mosque, and the threat to convert the Hora monastery, the Karacaami, into a mosque, would mean that Istanbul and other places, important Byzantine monuments in Turkey, in fact, are robbed from this Byzantine heritage. And although it's very hard to know what this will mean for the future, it is, I think it is bound to have a negative impact on what young people are taught maybe a waning in the interest of younger scholars if they don't have this visual contact and this experience of the space. And in addition to that, I think the fact that the Byzantine Congress is not sort of changed locations away from Istanbul, I think, although I'm not part of the committee that decided, so I'm not speaking on behalf of neither the Greek or the Turkish committee or the international committee, I think, I mean, the fact that the conference would bring 1,100 sort of Byzantinists to Istanbul, it would have meant something very important for the monuments, for the scholars, for our Turkish colleagues. And it is sad that this will not be happening, in part because of the political decision to convert Hagia Sophia into a mosque. Thank you.
Sevil?
Oh, just I think everything. I find the panel is really inspiring and thought-provoking. And I don't have anything specific to add. I just would like to thank all the panelists. Thank you.
Chidem?
Presentations, just a very quick answer to one question that came, and three, I think now, very quick points I would raise. The question was that Hagia Sophia, well, the way I presented it was a symbol of coexistence until the late 16th century, and something changed afterwards, and that wasn't my meaning. If that is what came through, I should correct that. What changed was basically religious attitudes and Ottoman official structuring of religion, which turned more into a Sunni Orthodox dogma and praxis, which also then changed Ottoman attitudes towards the presence of visual imagery within these spaces. This is also when the Korah mosaics possibly started to be covered. So this is an issue of what an imperial symbol can entail in different periods of time, rather than an issue of coexistence, which was always a matter of hierarchy within the Ottoman domains. 2 points that I got through this, I would just like to mention them. Public history, the need to make this discussion public, the need to make this information that is here within a perhaps relatively more limited environment public. This is in a way one of the issues that I feel see the urgency of, and the material presented here made me again think of this. The other is the need to think on the museum as well. At the time that Hagia Sophia was a museum, it was in fact a very strange museum, right? It did not really acknowledge either its Byzantine or its Ottoman past fully. And this was never truly debated. This was something we really lacked. And also, again, a publicization of this was something that we lacked. So for whatever it's worth now, I think this debate is still waiting, and it's worth having. And very briefly to Maria, the future of Byzantine studies in Turkey. Byzantine studies actually are thriving in Turkey, and again, thanks to institutions that you mentioned, Koç University, ANAMED, the program at Boğaziçi University, etc. I'm hugely disappointed with the decision, and it will subtract from the attention that will go to it. But there is a sustained interest now. I'm not a Byzantinist, but I observe this interest in the younger generation. So I think this will be kept, whatever.
Great.
Whoever decides.
Let's hope.
Sorry for taking probably longer than 1 or 2 minutes.
Thank you. Belgin, you're next in the order.
Thank you, Esra. I don't know if I will be able to be really very articulate, but just as an extension of what Çiğdem was saying about public history, after all these presentations, I thought that we were kind of like, there are like 2 tracks. We were going in between a popular political history, popular political take on the Hagia Sophia, and then we were also presenting our scholarly works on the building. And I was wondering, I mean, how do we negotiate this? How do we bridge these 2 different, sometimes seems to be like really very antithetical tracks? As an extension of that, I would also like to, if I'm allowed, to ask to Bisera, for instance, what are the implications of her brilliant work on Hagia Sophia for today, for the practical use of it for today? I wonder what she's thinking about on that. I mean, there's all this wonderful scholarly work, and then there are all these other developments, political, popular takes on the building. How do we come to terms with these sometimes perhaps intersecting tracks? I don't know if anybody would like to care to comment on that.
Yeah, maybe we can continue with the order and see if we have time for a 3rd round of speakers, if you don't mind, because we are really behind and we have a lot of questions that are addressed to the general panel rather than individuals. So I would propose that to continue. Peter, it's your turn.
Yeah, so as one of the co-hosts, I don't want to hog too much time on addressing my own presentation, but I was thrilled to get a question from Jeremy Walton, the anthropologist who's also studied Sigurðar and whose work I referenced in my final slide. And he mentions in his important essay in his History and Anthropology, the way that the city operates as a kind of allegorical entity for 3 different nationalist cultures. And what I was trying to do by actually adding the church to that mix is to question the very nature of city as allegory in the first place. I mean, Çiğdem had this fantastic suggestion of the Hagia Sophia as a shell, and I'm wondering, can we describe a building as a shell, or if it's going to have this allegorical function, must we also describe and be material still and extant? Do we need to also describe it as a kind of skeleton? So looking, both at the skin and the substructure. But I really thank Jeremy for that question and giving me the opportunity to articulate a bit more about that particular city and its role as a allegory. So with that, I think I'll just turn the floor over to Nicos.
Yes, hello from me as well. It is impossible to try and summarize all that has been said. I'm not going to try and do any general statements. I think I have answered 2 or 3 questions that were addressed to me in the chat, so I'm going to use my 1 minute to prompt Peter and Mujahid to talk a bit more about their presentations, because I saw some affinities with these sort of references to popular lore and folk songs and sort of national myths. And I also wanted to mention to Peter that I was amazed by this Shrinji, I think was the person that wrote this folk song about not being able to tell one person, one sort of nation from the other. And I'm sure you already know that Byron had written a poem called The Siege of Corinth, where he describes a battle between Greeks and Turks, where he also makes a similar sort of conclusion that after this sort of great massacre, not even their mothers could tell who was who, which, regardless of the context in which the poem was written or what Byron might have meant at that point, is also an interesting allegory about architectural heritage in the lands of the former Ottoman Empire. But to close this long parenthesis, I'd like to ask Peter and Mujahid whether they see in their whether they see any re-inscription of oral tradition and popular lore onto the final building, or whether that's sort of from sort of oral tradition, whether that becomes architectural or visual form again. That's it. Thank you.
Mujahid, do you want to go since I've spoken?
I think it is
Okay.
my turn. Is that
All right.
okay? Oh, okay, go ahead.
Okay, so thank you, Nicos. I think it will be interesting to have a kind of comparative study of Turkish and Greek kind of popular myths about Hagia Sophia beyond architectural things, how politically they are constructed. That will be interesting, as I was thinking about the elements that kind of animates contemporary sentiment about the place. It's really beyond religion. It's beyond, it's not so much about the past. It has to do with kind of dignity of the people, nationalist pride, and so on. So it's an area that I think comparative work would illuminate a lot. I'll say that much. Thank you. Is that my turn or not yet? That's my turn, huh?
It's me and then you, but we may shift if you want to continue.
So I would like to quickly respond to a question that was posted. So there was a question about the post-colonial discourse being instrumentalized against critiques of decision to turn the place into a mosque. But I think the name was NS, I don't remember last name. The question is, do they not realize that they are legitimizing might makes right? These are Islamists, and you expect them to be more concerned about what is right rather than what, power. My response is that Islamist interest in postmodernism and post-colonial theory in the 1990s onwards have been mostly instrumental against secular modernity of Kemalism. And once Islamists gained power, they basically they forgot about all the kind of multiculturalist, pluralistic discourse they were using. And as a conclusion to my response, Islamism is Muslim nationalism, and as such, it's an absolutely secular ideology through and through. So there should be no surprise that they don't care about religion. Islamism really doesn't care about religion. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. So maybe as the co-host as well, I would like to say a few words about some of the commonalities that I saw throughout the presentations. Even though we are working on very different time periods, and of course we didn't agree on everything, but nonetheless, I did see some commonalities. First, about the diverse history of Hagia Sophia that needs to be preserved. And I also think that we all saw Hagia Sophia as an educational place, which should also deserve the scholarly work of international and cosmopolitan scholars. I also thought a lot of us were talking about the dangers of nationalism, wherever it is, whether in Turkey or Greece or anywhere else, and populism and revanchism. And one of the questions that I got was about how this reflects on the current immigration policies, and someone reminded in the questions that currently the immigrants are still treated quite horrifically. So that, I think, I would like to say that maybe the anti-immigrant nationalist ideology is very much alive still. And And what I get from these totality of presentations is that actually we need to uphold the anti-nationalist, anti-cosmopolitan studies. We need to uphold the international, transnational studies against the rhetoric of the conquest, against the rhetoric of anti-immigration, against the rhetoric of nationalism, and we need to make it public. And there was also a question to me, I think, about the Kora Museum. The fact that the Kora Museum is also made a mosque now, though it did not have the weight of the Hagia Sophia. What does this say, was the question, I believe. So I think this fact also confirms the argument that the conversion, in my mind at least, the conversion into mosque was less of an anti-imperialist gesture, but more of an imperialist conquest gesture. And I mean, obviously the definition of the victim is not the synonym of the good. Just because a group has been victimized in the past doesn't make them good by definition. So the victims of the past can be the victimizers of the present. So that's what I see. That's how I would answer the Kora Museum question. Thank you. So we may move to Bülent. So.
I think Mesut was before me, but...
Sorry, Mesut, sorry.
I can also very briefly comment about the current situation regarding cultural heritage in Turkey. I think what we are witnessing with Hagia Sophia, to be able to give a meaning to it, we need to look also to a larger picture. I mean, even just after Hagia Sophia, we have seen Kora Museum. We have witnessed a horrible intervention to Galata Tower under the name of a so-called conservation project. And this is only Istanbul. When we look at the Eastern Turkey, the situation is even more violent. So I think all these control over cultural heritage force us to have a position against the current power holders. And even though Turkey is a part of European Commission and there are policies asking more democratic decision-making processes about cultural heritage. But I think the main question that I'm also asking to myself is, can we really do it under an autocratic regime? And I really don't see that quite possible. For that reason, also as heritage experts, we need to have a very clear position against central power. And this is my final comment. And I would also like to thank the panel organizers as well as panelists. I learned a lot today. Thank you.
Bülent?
Yes, I will just try to briefly respond to a question that was conveyed. It was about the recent mosques, how they are significant. Well, yes, obviously there's a symbolic motive behind building mosques, making them visible. And obviously the most visible one was, well, you're going to build something in Istanbul, but you want Istanbul to see it. So you build it where you build it on the other side, right? On the Anatolian side. So on top of Çamlıca Hill. So this very large mosque, not very accessible. So it is doomed to be empty, but it's very visible. So this is a typical thing actually. And obviously the style, referring back to the classical Ottoman architecture, it is also something that we see again and again for the past 15, 20 years. But one thing that I think we should also keep in mind is that architecture is not merely about style. So although this is about showing off, at the same time, these are spaces intended to serve for Islamization of society as well. And there are lots of mechanisms that are put in motion within these spaces as well. Thank you.
So Ezra and I have looked at some of the many questions that have come in, and we've had to make a pretty dramatic selection, but we'll try to pose two questions from the audience. And the first one will be for everyone. So whoever wishes to address this may. I'll quote the question now. There has been a predisposition to give heritage moral responsibilities to tell the truth, turning sites into protagonists of history, when actually heritage only mirrors time, decisions, and interests, nothing different than the present situation. How is it possible to move outside a system like cultural heritage that benefits nationality, territoriality, collectivity, when the design and development of the cultural heritage concept emerges from a political organization, i.e. UNESCO, with political counterparts such as member states, and political outcomes such as national narratives, borders, and majorities? So if I may even try to paraphrase this question. Is the institution of something like UNESCO something that we should assume as a unilateral positive force, or might we actually also here find an opportunity to critique it as well as something actually reinforcing national definitions by way of its structure?
Perhaps I can just quickly say a couple of things about that. I don't know if you can hear me, but of course there is a literature, growing literature on UNESCO, critical literature, and the way apparently it works. I mean, I mentioned UNESCO's work. Well, the way it is actually organized is based on national membership. That is for a start is not a very good sign. I mean, in terms of what Esra was saying. I mean, we should really definitely go beyond those, you know, nationalisms and national boundaries. But also, well, I have a degree. I never practiced. From a distance, what I see is now there is a huge bureaucracy machine on cultural heritage. It is not only about because of UNESCO, but there is a culture industry of cultural heritage, and I think that might be a problem as well. I really think that we need to think about the definition of cultural heritage, really. I think it's a very good question. It is, but I think we need to be more optimistic, actually, although it's sobering and realistic. But yeah, definitely, I think we really need to think about cultural heritage and to whom it serves, by whom, by which centers actually it is usually shaped. I think that's a very good question.
Anyone else want, Bisara, please.
And this is also to an extent an answer to Belgin's question to me. I find that academia had provided probably one of the best venues to think about these complex sites where different religions have invested so much of their energy. And I would like to speak about a couple of things. I was trained as a Byzantinist at Harvard, and I studied with Guru Necipoglu, where my love for Ottoman architecture started. And I find this environment very special. I'm Bulgarian, so in a sense, coming back to the Ottoman past was, in new terms, was a very important encounter for me. When my work on Hagia Sophia has been in the past 10 years, it has been always international. Half of the staff that as we work are from Turkey. And the results that it had brought really speak to this international integrative role. I find that if only in a sense universities are allowed to reshape the way this space is presented to visitors, to viewers, could really be transformative. And we've never had, in a sense, this chance. When it was a museum, we didn't have the chance, and now even less so. the building speaks to two religions, to Christianity and Islam, for a variety of reasons. And if this dialogue, in a sense, is sustained, it will be a much more important contribution. So unfortunately, we live in a time that is very divisive, and in a sense, the cracks are really showing more and more presently. So I would love, if we have a chance, to think of ways in which we could offer this building in a rich and an important way to our 21st century audience.
Masoud, would you like to add to that?
Yes, very briefly, thank you. UNESCO is actually born in the, is a design, and it is designed in the post-Second World War circumstances. It is a, I would like to refer to Lynn Maskell's The Future in Ruins. She suggests that UNESCO was in fact a hope for global peacemaking after wars. And as Professor Belgin Turan Özkaya said, of course, through time it may be deteriorated or it created some problems, but cultural heritage in fact can be operated also for a global peacemaking. And I would second that suggestion. And also, as Lynn Maskell says, the recent inscription of Ani Cathedral to the UNESCO World Heritage List is a global effort for creating a friendship between Armenia and Turkey. So in my opinion, the problem is not in the cultural heritage, but the problem is how we manage it, how we act upon it. So in my opinion, if we manage the correct, democratic, open system, it can also help us create a peaceful future. That's what my response. Thank you.
Thank you, Masoud. I'll turn it over to Ezra.
Thank you. Since we all answered the individual questions that were addressed to us in the Q&A box, Peter and I thought we should select one question that is asked to the entire panel, and I selected a question that's about comparative studies. So the question asked us to draw comparisons between Turkish nationalism and its effects on Hagia Sophia with, say, American nationalism regarding racist heritage or Indian nationalism. What do we see when we look to the world at large, and how does Hagia Sophia become a paradigmatic case? So anyone who would like to? Mücahit, and then Chidem.
When kind of situated within a more global landscape of reclaiming historical monuments or disowning them and so on, the whole politics revolving around historical monuments seems to have something to do with what is popularly called post-truth age, where ownership trumps objective status of things, the truth value of things. So, I mean, the previous question that was raised about UNESCO and so on is kind of gives me a sense of search for some statelessness in the domain of cultural heritage. And I find that a little naive, that we live in an age where ownership is being reaffirmed and reasserted at the expense of truth, at the expense of things we academics search and value in our relatively autonomous domain of truth seeking and objective knowledge. All objective knowledge is being under attack, and it's kind of turned into subjective feeling, which is the sense of ownership, private property. So I think more productive thinking should go in the direction of how do we, given that we are in a kind of selfish, collectivistically kind of selfish moment, how do we preserve those monuments? For example, Hagia Sophia now is under Turkish control. Turkish state wants to own it. Well, given that they converted it into a mosque, we should think about its maintenance and preservation and so on. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Chidam, I think you had your, no? Okay. Anyone who would like to take the comparative question? I mean, I may perhaps say a few words about how the American nationalism is affecting the debates now. I think there was the removal of the monuments that were done in the Jim Crow era, which were, you know, many historians agree, there's a consensus that these were racist monuments. They were not like the monuments that can be layered and nuanced and so on and so forth. And it seemed that the more nationalist, Trumpist ideology tried to write the history of these Jim Crow monuments as if they are of American heritage. They tried to erase that racist history. So in my opinion, even though, as Mücahit said, we are living in a post-truth world, as academics, I think there are I think our task is to go beyond the simplistic and usually non-factual interpretations of architecture of the monuments by the political agenda, and to uphold truth, or maybe not look at the notion of truth as something passé or something. Maybe we need to find ways of upholding truth again. So that would be my 2 cents about this comparative question. Anyone else who wants to answer?
We've run 40.
Namık?
I just wanted to maybe also to tie it up. This panel also represents a way to look to such a case, because you know, isolating the case of Hagia Sophia, something that happens in Turkey through the Turkish politics, does not help. It's very easy to, you know, isolate it. And I think with the representations here, we had a kind of a perspective, as in the title, for understanding that this is a general trend in cultural heritage in the world that's happening today. This is a very important example, but I think there we should really take it in comparison to other examples in an international context, not isolated local context. Thank you.
We've run 42 minutes over schedule, but I'm happy we did. But if Ezra agrees, I think it's time that we wrap up. We thank everyone, again, the presenters for joining us today, and the attendees for sticking with us for over 3 hours. And we look forward to seeing the panelists for our little get-together afterwards, too.
Yeah, I would also like to thank very much everyone for attending, for their ideas. And I would like to inform you of our next event. The theme of IES Migration Series for this academic year is Repair and Reparations. So our next event is Beirut Reconstructions webinar on October 7. We also have an upcoming event on repatriation of museum objects between Europe and Africa on October 19. So please stay tuned and participate in our events. And thank you very much again, everyone.